Hello and welcome to the video. So you might have seen the title or the thumbnail of this video, and it's talking about a recent video that another YouTube channel and sports performance training company have just released called TrainerRoad, and it's about managing carbohydrate, and they talk also about diabetes. So this was actually, I think, the first video I've ever watched from TrainerRoad. So just to explain, they're a company that sells essentially coaching and information mainly for cyclists, and this video the video was called The Truth About Carbs for Cyclists. So I'm going to react to this video and I'm going to talk as though I was the one being asked the questions and explain the information properly. So the reason why I'm making this video is because I'm pretty angry actually. So this channel is all about health. So I specialize in weight loss and health gain, and I promote also positivity and freedom and happiness that you get from having good health through the foods and the food plans that I recommend, and the freedom and adventure that riding a bike gives you. But I think this interview, so the interview was with Kyle Pfaffanbach, I think that's how you pronounce it. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. But I think this video is a complete train wreck, a complete disaster. So if you're maybe type 2 diabetic right now and you're watching this, or maybe you're pre-diabetic, you need to watch this video right now that you're watching, because this is going to be a video that you can use to share with other people who are concerned about their health. And this is going to be that you're going to get the information that you should have received from this video, which I think is appalling. Okay, so I'm going to play the video through. I'm going to play it through about double speed, just so that we're not here forever, because it's a 50-minute video. And I've got a load of information that I'm going to share. I'm going to stop it at several points during the video and tell you the information that you need to hear, okay? Because, yeah, I won't spend any more time introducing it. I'll just get on with the video. But, yeah, this is going to be a guide, so you'll be able to come back to this video over and over again, because I'm going to fill it with lots of information in order for you to improve your health and not be conned by information that is not going to help you. Okay, so I hope TrainerRoad see this video and they make a reply, or I don't know. I hope there's some positivity comes from this, and that the video that I'm making doesn't get flagged for copyright, or they try and hide the information. So yeah, pretty angry on this one. I think you probably can tell, but we'll get on with it, okay? So stick around and hope you find the video helpful and constructive. This is going to be real scientific information, okay? Here we are. So I'm going to play the video in 2x speed, so it might sound a bit strange. And I've got some notes as well that I'm going to periodically stop throughout the video and pick up on what they're saying and offer you perhaps real information, real life-saving information potentially. So yeah, I'm not going to go through the entire video. I'm just going to go through what I think is important, and then by the time that I finished with my reaction to this video, I think I would have covered what I think is the most important. So yeah, let's get on with it.
Welcome to the Ask the Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. Today we are going to talk about if all this high carb intake is making athletes diabetic. It's controversial.
So firstly, carbohydrates do not cause diabetes. So this is not a controversial topic, okay?
topic. We're also going to talk about low carb intake for cyclists. And we have with us Dr. Kyle Pfaffanbach from Eastern Oregon University, coach to the stars. I'll just say we've got the Brooks Beast. We've had tons of athletes that you've coached to pretty amazing feats on the nutrition side. That's where, if you don't know, that's where Kyle is focused on the nutrition side. Kyle, let's get into Michael's question. You can submit your questions down below in the YouTube comments. Go ahead and do that now. Kyle says, I'm a 46-year-old male athlete with no pre-existing or chronic medical conditions. I'm a Cat 2, and that's in road, cyclocross, and mountain bike. I actively stopped competing in 2016, but remained active via casual riding, gym, and extensive ski touring. Kyle, is this you?
Seriously, this is like literally.
Yeah. No, Kyle and I love ski touring.
My top I'm also 46, so like this is crazy. I was like, wait a second, I'm not a Cat 2 rider now.
Yeah, okay. So I began training to compete in gravel races this past August and integrated contemporary nutrition theory as part of my program. Higher grams of carbs per hour, typically training and racing with 70 to 90 grams per hour.
70 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. Okay. So I'd have to say, firstly, to this person, Michael, what are you doing? It's 2025. So I would recommend at least 100 grams of carbohydrates, 100 grams of sugar an hour. So I recommend white table sugar. And no matter how easy or long your ride is, always at least 100 grams an hour to start. And then the harder that your ride is, the more you increase it. And you don't put an upper limit on how much you should have. So you should have as much as you feel you need in order to perform at your best. So for me, I find that about 140 grams an hour is about my upper limit before I start to feel, well, a bit sickly. And that allows me to perform at my best when I'm doing hard rides or races. So don't limit the sugar intake when you're training, because you want to have the best results. You want to go fast. So there you go. 2025, okay, it's not 1999 where we did 70 grams an hour, okay? It's 2025.
In December, I had a comprehensive blood panel, routine not related to any sort of illness, and it included my hemoglobin A1C. The value was high at 5.9.
And I have 140 grams, but if you wanted to have, 300 grams of sugar an hour, and that didn't make you feel sick, and you were still flying on the bike, along the road on the bike, then have it, okay? No limit. No limit.
Following a brief call with
If you put a limit on sugar, you put a limit on your speed.
my primary care physician, we both agreed that the results were likely a result of my increased consumption of simple sugars over the last several months. Anecdotally, I live in Boulder, Colorado, and my primary care physician shared she has seen similar results given the area's patient population of competitive athletes. Everybody's fast in Boulder.
So if everyone's fast in Boulder, presumably that means that a lot of people are having sugar in Boulder. So is everyone diabetic in Boulder? Because everyone's on high levels of sugar? I guess we'll find out.
My question, has Kyle Pfaffanbach seen similar results with some of the athletes he works with? I understand this is private, personal, HIPAA information, so only asking for a very obtuse yes or no response. We're going to get more than a yes or no on this one, in this case, but hoping to get opinion from an individual who has intimate experience with athletes and their blood panel info. All other test results were normal. Glucose was 80.
Do you hear that? All the blood tests were normal. All the blood tests were normal. Okay, so first of all, what's the worry if the blood tests were normal?
5 milligrams per deciliter. I never know what to say, Kyle. Deciliter, there we are. And insulin at 5.5, and I'm not even going to go into try to pronounce that one there. Lots of little letters and big letters to mean it's normal. Okay, so this question from Michael.
There you go. So I could end the video here. So they're talking about this blood test that this person's asking about, Michael. So I could end the video here because they've just said, they've answered their own question whether there's any worries about health. He said blood test was normal, within normal range. But because there's so much misinformation, I think, in the rest of this video that might make people sick and unhealthy, I'm going to continue on. Okay? I'm going to brave it, and I'm going to try and keep my anger, a lid on my anger, okay? And give you the information because you deserve it. You're innocent, and you deserve to know the truth.
Well, he's not asking you to share the information of the specific athletes and their names and anything else like that. However, I have seen this actually with athletes have reported this before in podcast questions and other things where they say, hey, I got a blood panel done and my A1C was high. Is this normal? Do you see this in athletes that are taking high carb?
So again, they're talking about A1C. So you might have heard of it as HbA1c, so hemoglobin A1c. So they keep saying it reported, and he's just said that they keep saying it reported. But they're not saying it's not of concern, of no concern, because it's of no concern. Okay, an elevated A1C in athletes. Okay, we'll carry on, but yeah, again, they're saying the same thing, and they don't need to worry.
Intake, and is this theory of perhaps increased, in this case, like they said, let's see.
They keep seeing it reported in people that are healthy, so these athletes, okay?
Where I want to make sure I get the words exactly right. Both agree that results are likely a result of my increased consumption of simple sugars over the last several months. So where do you stand on all this? Because part of me thinks, Kyle, that when your body is in an active state, it's going to deal with this stuff in a different way than if it's in a sedentary state. And if you're an athlete, maybe it's...
So he's asking about, well, is the A1C, elevated A1C bad? It means nothing, okay, for athletes who are consuming lots of these simple sugars, inverted commas. So like I would recommend table sugar, which is sucrose. So that's a fructose and a glucose molecule. So like this, a glucose and fructose joined together. So a disaccharide. Okay, monosaccharide and two monosaccharides joined together to make disaccharide. And then the glucose in that, it gets broken down and released into the blood. And they have even just said it themselves, okay, that they see it all the time. And even the primary care physician, if you listen, for Michael, the person who's asking the question, said that she or he, I can't remember if he said it was she or he, sees it too, because there's lots of people in Boulder where this person's asking the question lives. Okay, so the people presenting this video and the physician, the care physician, all these people are seeing the elevated A1C. And as this athlete's just said, Michael, his blood work was within normal range. He was not diabetic. Okay, he was not diabetic within the normal range. But they were saying the A1C was elevated. Okay, but he's not diabetic. So can you see that even though the A1C is elevated, as an athlete, it means nothing, because as you've just seen, he's not diabetic. Okay, because his blood work says so, and you can't argue with the blood work. That is the definitive proof of how healthy someone is. Okay, that's the empirical evidence.
But maybe not. Maybe it is. Maybe we're all going diabetic with all this high carb intake.
Whoa. Okay, so if I said maybe the earth is flat, would you say, well, no, it's not? Okay, and we know the earth is not flat. Okay, it's sort of a round shape. It's not quite round, it's sort of an oblate spheroid, I think is the word they use. And also, if someone came along and said to you, right, give me all of your life savings and I'll invest them and make you a millionaire, you would say, well, no, I'm not going to do that, because you know that that's not true. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you now what type 1 and type 2 diabetes is, okay? So type 1 diabetes is when the cells in the pancreas that would normally produce insulin, so if you're America, you might say beta cells, and if you're maybe in Europe or in the UK, where I am, you'd say beta cells, and these cells would normally produce insulin, but because of reasons unknown, well, not reasons unknown, one of the most likely causes is because type 1 diabetes is an immune response. So it's an autoimmune disease. So this means that it looks like from scientific papers from a growing consensus within the scientific community that dairy products, so dairy milk, cow's milk, when you are a child, so type 1 diabetes also used to be called child onset diabetes, but because so many people who are type 2, and I'll get into that right now, are becoming diabetic in such a young age, it's sort of not being used anymore. But yeah, when you are a child and you've been given cow's milk, the protein in that milk, which is, there's a lot of protein in it, a lot of fat and a lot of protein, has the similar amino acids, or has the amino acids that we have in our bodies, because we're animals as well, and because we're animals, they're similar. Whereas plants, because they still have amino acids, but the profile and the proteins are so different. The reason why your body is attacking your pancreas, so your body attacks your own beta cells and destroys them, because we have identified, and there's a paper, I think it's from 1992, which they found the same 17 amino acids that get attacked in the pancreas, the beta cells, that are in cow's milk. So the body identifies the proteins that get through into the bloodstream and then broken down, and then the body identifies these as foreign, but then it also starts to attack the body, because it also identifies your body as foreign, and it destroys it over a period of several years, about something like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and then you can no longer produce insulin. So that's type 1, and it used to be, some people might still call it child onset diabetes, so type 1. And type 2 is completely reversible, because it's from diet. It's because of the foods you eat. So a high fat, primarily a high fat, excess fat in your diet leads to insulin resistance. Okay, and I'm going to explain that more thoroughly if you watch the video, which means that you're still producing enough insulin as a normal person. So you might, you're a child, you don't get type 1, and then through your adult life, so type 2 diabetes is also called adult onset diabetes, but again, people are getting type 2 diabetes now so young that sort of isn't really used anymore. So you're getting children now who are getting type 2 diabetes because all the excess fat from the SAD diet, the standard American diet, or the standard Western diet of high fat and high animal protein, blocks the ability for insulin and the insulin response, and therefore you're still producing insulin, but the fat causes insulin resistance, and therefore sugar can't get into the cells, and the fat disrupts your mitochondria as well. So this is the difference, and there are other ones like type 1.5, which is sort of a mix of the two. So I'm focusing on type 1 and type 2 in this video, because especially type 2, I'm going to focus on type 2 in this video because it's affecting a lot of people at the moment. A lot of people may be watching this video, and more people in the world. But the key takeaway from this video is that type 2 diabetes is 100% reversible. Okay, 100% reversible through diet. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you now why there are so many people who are type 2 diabetic, why there's an increasing trend in people becoming type 2 diabetic. Okay, so the pharmaceutical industry, as of 2025, when I last looked, was worth around $1.6 trillion, something like that, around that sort of money. So that's essentially the largest, most powerful, most wealthy industry on the planet, second only to the military industrial complex in terms of how big the industry is. So nothing will ever beat the military industrial complex of the USA, but coming close is the power of the military industrial complex, but second to that is probably pharmaceutical industry. Okay, so if I'm telling you that type 2 diabetes is completely reversible just through changing your diet to a low fat, plant-based, no oil, vegan diet, which is what I promote, and I'll get onto that, but essentially rice, fruit, and sugar, then you can see why there's going to be lots of confusion, like videos like this, which I think are absolutely appalling. And I don't know whether this Kyle knows the truth and is just got a script and he's just making these he's just talking and confusing people, or whether he learned from textbooks that were written by the pharmaceutical industry. So the pharmaceutical industry wants people to be diabetic, type 2 diabetic, because they make so much money. So again, looking at the industry for just type 2 diabetes. So as a whole, the pharmaceutical industry is 1.6 trillion. But you can't get an exact figure, but as of about 2024, 2025, just type 2 diabetes alone, the market for it is worth about $40 billion at the moment. And it's something like, it's expected to reach maybe up to 100 billion by about this time. So about 5 to 10 years from now, it will be 100 billion. Because more and more people are becoming type 2 diabetic from a primarily high fat and high animal protein diet. Okay, and I'm going to explain. Say this video is going to be a guide for you to save your life, and don't listen to this ridiculous nonsense that is being told in a video like this. So, type 2 diabetes can be solved simply through simple lifestyle change, diet change. But this doesn't happen. You just get told, well, vegan diet is unhealthy, it will lead you to die. So I hope you can see, at least from my face, that I'm very lean and healthy. And from my other videos on the channel, you'll be able to see that I love cycling and I love going on 100-mile adventures, and I'm not chronically fatigued or diabetic. And I eat lots and lots and lots of sugar. Okay, I live on a high sugar diet of rice, fruit, and sugar, and this is what I recommend for people on their meal plans. Okay, and I'm going to talk about the science. Okay, so the pharmaceutical industry does not want you to be healthy, because a healthy population doesn't generate money, and therefore there'd be no doctors, there'd be no healthcare system, just like in the rest of the world where they don't suffer from diabetes. It's a Western disease. Okay, so type 2 diabetes is a cash cow for the pharmaceutical industry. They want your money and they don't care about your health.
It's a complicated question because first of all, A1C is going to be like, there's going to be some individual variation in it. And maybe we should describe what A1C is. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, this is a good... Cool.
So he goes on to actually not explain HbA1c or A1c, and goes on to try and explain diabetes and insulin insulin resistance instead. But then about 15 minutes later, after he's been asked about H1C, he then answers. So we'll get onto that.
Good point. So type 2 diabetes and the prevalence of type 2 diabetes is relatively new phenomenon for the human race. Let's just like put it into major ways. And the prevalence of type 2
So I'll just replay this.
diabetes is relatively new phenomenon for the human race. Let's just like put it into major macro context. First of all, let's back.
So I'll just play it a little bit longer.
Farther than that. When I ingest carbohydrates.
So he doesn't ever explain about this phenomenon, this new phenomenon about the human race becoming type 2. So I'm going to play that again so that you hear it and don't miss that, okay?
I was thinking, like, this is a good point. So type 2 diabetes and the prevalence of type 2 diabetes is relatively new phenomenon for the human race. Let's just like put it into major macro context. First of all, let's back up even further.
So that's it. He doesn't say any more about that. That's it. And that's so important. So important. So I'm going to explain to you now how I'm going to show you how insulin resistance works, and I'm also going to explain why it just boggles my mind, just says something that important and then just carries on, because that, if he explained why it's a new disease for humanity, the video would just end because he would explain everything. Okay, so the reason why diabetes, so type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetes, it's linked to the diet. Okay, so to explain the history, so I'm going to explain the history now and population studies. So that's epidemiological studies. Okay, so the history of the human diet. Okay, so again, this video, it's a guide. You'll be able to use it and come back to it, and you'll be able to understand the world, how the world works. So about 10 to 12, 13,000 years ago, human beings all around the world started to farm. So we started to grow staple crops. So modern, sort of pre-modern agriculture started about 10 to 12 to 13 years, about 10,000 years ago or so, all around the planet after the end of the last ice age. And these staple crops included foods like corn, rice, and beans, and wheat, and barley, and potatoes, and sweet potatoes. These staple crops, okay? And these staple crops allowed human beings, the populations of human beings, to have food security. And then that's why the human population started to increase, why we were able to, rather than just survive day to day like the hunter-gatherer type of existence, where all you do is just survive from day to day, you could then focus your attention on other things like civilization and building. And then we had we had wars, because we were able to grow enough food for armies to then go around the world and kill each other for no reason whatsoever. And then eventually, you fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, and then especially the beginning of, the 1900s or so. So just around the First World War, just pre-World War, World War One, most people had lived on the staple crops of these foods. As I say, potatoes and rice and sweet potatoes and corn and wheat and barley, all of these types of grains and maybe legumes. And so you've got above ground storage and below ground storage. So like you have, corn, wheat is above ground storage for plants, and then below ground storage like rice and potatoes. And most of so 99.9% of the world's population up until basically the start of the 19th century, so up until about World War One or so, have been living on this. And the foods that were high in fat and animal protein were those that were eaten by the rich. So the kings and the queens of old, and the pharaohs of Egypt, and the aristocracy, and those who had power and wealth would eat the animals and these sort of fatty foods and cheeses and this sort of thing. And the peasantry would eat these high carbohydrate staples. So I think a beautiful way to see this is, and one of the nicknames that the gladiators had in Rome, these big strapping men, strong muscly men, who would fight tigers. So we've just found new evidence of a tiger biting bones of a, so you can check that out, that's just been found. But they were called the barley men, and that's because they lived on a plant-based diet, because this was the diet that allowed, so a high carbohydrate plant-based diet back in the Roman times, in Rome and gladiator where they went around, but the colosseums and the arenas entertaining people, the foods that were given to them by their owners. So gladiators were slaves, so they were owned, and therefore they were a product, and they were a product that needed to perform at its best. So it needed the best fuel to perform at the best level, and therefore win and entertain and make money for the gladiator owner or the slave owners. So they fed them a diet that allowed the gladiators to perform, which was a high carbohydrate, plant-based diet. Okay. So now we have reached the modern age, and we now live in an age of plenty, or excess, as some would say. We can eat the foods of the kings and the queens, okay? And this is the way you need to think about the way you live. So we've completely turned our back in the Western world. So I'm talking about the standard American diet, which the acronym for is SAD. It's SAD, Standard American Diet. You could also call it SWD, Standard Western Diet, but I like to call it SAD because it's killing people, and therefore it's sad. It's killing people just like it killed aristocracy and the kings and queens of old. So if you live in the UK, you might have heard of someone called Henry VIII, and he's famous for being absolutely enormous. And in his paintings, because he would eat and he would stuff himself because he was a king, okay, the king of England. So there's some history for you. And now everyone is now eating like this because as people earn money and the standards of living increase and the availability of animal products, high fat animal products and high protein are available to everyone. And those people who start eating like this, these fatty protein-rich foods or animal protein-rich foods, are dying of heart disease and diabetes and obesity and atherosclerosis and all of these, and kidney disease, and there's so many, of these chronic diseases, and most of them are reversible through diet change. Okay, so we didn't see diabetes like we do in the past, and we know this because there are populations today and during the 20th century who shifted from the traditional diet of the high carbohydrate diet to the high fat, animal protein and ever decreasing amount of carbohydrate intake. So for example, before the 1980s in China, most people, so between 1970 and 1980, there was a political change in China, and it became more open to the West. So there was political reform, and they essentially started to accept capitalism into their culture rather than being this communist state. And therefore they started to look to the West, and they thought, well, we want to be like them, rich, and eat like them, and be powerful. And therefore the diet of the standard Chinese went from essentially based on a high carbohydrate diet of white rice to accepting what we now eat in the West, which is lots of animal products and lots of dairy and fish and eggs and steak and bacon and all these sorts of foods, and these processed animal foods. So like the hot dog is probably the most processed food that you can buy, and that's just all of the bits of the animal that weren't used in other ways. So like the toes and the genitals and the eyes and all these sorts of bits mashed up and stuck together in a hot dog. And yeah, it's horrific, isn't it? So the rate of diabetes in China before 1980 or the 1970s was very low, less than 1%. And now China has one of, if not the largest diabetic population on the planet, and ever increasing every year, because they're eating more of the Western way of living and not their traditional white rice diet, a high carbohydrate diet. Okay, so you can't lie. Epidemiological studies don't lie, because they're just, when people, they just look at what a population is doing, it's not being biased or manipulated by people. If it was a study, like a double-blind study that was being controlled in a lab or whatever, this is just when scientists go out and they look. So another one, the China study. Okay, the China study is the largest nutrition and population study ever carried out. And it's when scientists, they went over to China from America or from the West, and they went and looked at what the Chinese were doing with their diet. And they found that essentially the overall point of the study was that a vegan or plant-based diet reverses all of these chronic diseases like we see in the West, like heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. But they also saw, just as a sort of a consequence of looking at what they ate, people who were living on these high carbohydrate diets, the traditional diets of the Chinese, white rice, didn't suffer from diabetes, or the rates were extremely low. Okay. And another population study, you might have heard of it, is the blue zone of the Okinawans in Japan. Okay, so this, if you haven't heard of blue zones, this is essentially I think it's the 5 places around the world where most people live to 100 years old. So the centurions, or as I like to call them, the centurions, like the Roman soldier. And the only problem is with these 5 studies is the only one that actually uses scientific evidence, so uses blood work and biomarkers, is the Okinawan blue zone, whereas all the rest, a lot of them, they use just questionnaires, and they just questionnaire people, whereas the Okinawan study, blue zone study, actually took blood work and studied people over years, and it wasn't just asking people a question on a piece of paper or face to face. They actually looked at what people ate. And this was years ago now. So the Okinawan diet is now changing. But their diet, again, and they did not suffer from diabetes. And their diet was primarily based on rice and sweet potatoes. Okay? Rice and sweet potato was the vast majority of their diet. A high carbohydrate diet. And now that more and more of the Okinawans are eating more of the Western way, living more of the Western style, so high fat, high protein, the rates of diabetes are going up. So our genetics is not changing, okay? So we're not evolving or something, like this over 10 years or 100 years. So there was no diabetes. Type 2, there was very little type 1 before about 100 to 150 years ago. And now hundreds of millions of people have it. And every year, millions more have it. And also because dairy is increased, there's more type 1 diabetes linked to dairy. So type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. And there's so much evidence shows, and it's obvious, that it's because of dairy. Dairy, the protein from dairy, is causing an autoimmune response. The body's own immune system is attacking itself, attacking the body. Okay, so I'm going to show you now how insulin resistance works with this little diagram, okay? So I'll come out of this format where I'm on the video and I'll do a little lecture, okay? And then we'll come straight back in. This is how insulin resistance works, okay? So on the right, or my right, your left, this is a normal function and this is a resistance, okay? So normally when you consume a carbohydrate and you're releasing glucose into the blood, insulin comes along, binds with the protein in the cell membrane, and the insulin binding, it was released from the pancreas into the bloodstream, comes along to the cell, goes to the insulin receptor. This then releases a signal to the GLUT4, so the glucose 4 transporters. These are in the cytoplasm of the cell. They are then released and they come up, they are taken up to the cell membrane and they come up through the cell membrane, and they're like hollow tubes of protein, and the glucose comes in and it goes through the transporters and goes into the cell. That's how it should process normally. When you have resistance, okay, what happens is you still release insulin, so you're eating a high fat and sugary meal. So there's high fat, but there's also sugar in the meal. But if you're eating, you're going to produce a insulin response. So because of the fat blocks this whole process, the signaling process. So when insulin here and insulin here, comes in to the insulin receptor site, the signaling process is blocked from all of the excess fat. So that means that the signal is blocked, and the GLUT4, so the glucose 4 transporters, don't go up to the surface, come up to the surface, and therefore the glucose doesn't enter the cell. It comes and it goes away, okay, because it's not coming into the cell, okay. And the reason why you want glucose is because it comes in and you want it to produce ATP. So glucose would come in, and firstly in the cytoplasm it goes through glycolysis. So this is glucose derived ATP, and I'm not going to go into the fine details of respiration. I'm just going to keep it simple and brief for now, because you can look that up yourself. It's widely available. All this information is available, okay? It's all available. I'm not making any of this up, okay? So then the product of glycolysis, then it goes into the mitochondria of the cell. So it goes into the Krebs cycle, and that goes, spins around, okay? And then that produces molecules which then go to, and that produces ATP. And then that produces molecules which then go to the electron transport chain, okay? So this is the most important part of the respiration, or producing energy for living. And this happens in the intermembrane space in the mitochondria. So the mitochondria has two membranes, and the electron transport chain occurs here in the intermembranous space, and this is what produces the most ATP, okay? So ATP, this is the molecule that you're producing when you're doing all this. So the reason why you need ATP is because you would die without it. So think of ATP as like the monetary currency of your cell. So the reason why you need ATP is because it makes, inside your cell, it makes everything work. So it gives the energy for essentially transactions to happen. So like your $10, £10 or €10 note is used, like, so if ATP is like a $10 note, it's used as a transaction to allow everything to occur in the cell. So to move ions around and create gradients across cell membranes. It keeps you alive. It makes the cell be able to function properly, normally. And the electron transport chain is what produces the most, okay? So it produces several times more ATP than glycolysis. So this is without oxygen. So glycolysis doesn't need oxygen to occur. So this is why it's the primary energy system of the human body. But this needs oxygen. So glycolysis, then Krebs cycle, and then oxidative phosphorylation in the electron transport chain. So the fat not only blocks glycolysis, it also blocks the electron transport chain because it comes into the cell, and fat can, what they call in the scientific literature is it can flip-flop, okay? So it might sound funny, but fatty acids can flip-flop across the membrane. Sugar can't. It needs this process. And so sugar can't. So the fat flip-flops across the membrane, it comes in and it can get in and it can disrupt the electron transport chain. And it can cause a blockage and a backup back through. So it disrupts the electron transport chain, then that disrupts oxidative phosphorylation, then that disrupts the Krebs cycle, and then that blocks up and disrupts the glycolysis. And eventually that can cause programmed cell death within a cell because you're not producing ATP anymore. So this it's not diabetes. This is type 2 diabetes, is not a sugar disease, okay? So diabetes is not a sugar disease. It's a fat, as highlighted by this green highlighter. It's a fat and insulin disease. So it's an insulin disorder, metabolic disorder caused by fat, excess dietary fat, and partly protein as well. But the main cause is excess dietary fat, okay? So that's how insulin resistance, that's what insulin resistance is, okay? To put it as simply as I can, and so that everyone can understand, okay? So I'll take you back to the video and we'll carry on from where he was starting to talk about what is diabetes. So there you go. So I hope I haven't made any spelling mistakes. Gluc4, yeah. So glucose 4 transport resistance, yeah. So there you go. So you take a screenshot of that. So welcome back. We're going to continue.
Even farther than that. When I ingest carbohydrates.
So he's going to talk about, so he's just been asked about H1.
Good, that's a good point. So type 2 diabetes and the prevalence of type 2 diabetes.
So I'll just replay it.
Maybe we should describe what A1C. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like this is a good point. So type 2 diabetes.
So he's just asked about it and he doesn't answer it. So I'm going to skip forward. He essentially just talks about some of the anatomy of the body, which you don't really need to understand diabetes. Okay.
Track are coming in through the portal.
If you want to watch the whole thing, you can go and watch it back, but I'd recommend watching this first, but it's up to you.
Basically, you fill all that sugar goes into your portal circulation, and then that goes into the liver. The liver takes what it wants. So this is called first pass nutrient. Okay.
So first pass, just to explain what he means by first pass, because this other bloke, Jonathan, doesn't seem to ever ask him anything. So first pass, this is a pharmacological effect, okay? So the liver filters the blood, okay? So the first pass effect is when is for drugs. So when you take a drug and it goes through the liver, it quite often reduces the effects of that drug. So it becomes has less effect once it's gone through the liver, because the liver detoxifies the blood, okay? The liver keeps you alive, okay? So that's what he means by first pass.
It's something that is sort of the liver is the big dog of the body. It eats first, and so it gets first pass nutrient uptake into.
So, yeah. We'll carry on.
Depending on the composition of sugars and the needs of the liver, it's going to basically meet its energetic needs and refill with glycogen, because we produce.
So, just so there's no misunderstanding, okay? Excess glucose, excess sugar that you eat is stored as glycogen. So, on the muscles or on the liver, it is not stored as fat, okay? Excess fat is stored as fat. Glucose, sugar, is stored as glycogen.
The liver is the main organ that releases blood sugar during fasting and overnight and things like that. And it does that through a combination of being able to produce sugar from non-sugar carbon skeletons. This is called gluconeogenesis.
So I promote on this channel a low fat, low protein, high sugar or high carbohydrate diet. You can call it a high sugar diet or a diet based on rice, fruit and sugar. But partly another great reason why a low protein diet is great is because this makes, so he's talked about you can get fuel another way. Okay, so I'll just briefly explain that a little bit more. So less protein in the body means you use more fat. So you burn fat through lipolysis. And that's used to make glycerol. And then the body then uses that to make glucose. And therefore, as a result, you burn more fat. Okay? It's great, isn't it? You know, the answer is right there in front of you. Okay? So I've already explained ATP. So just briefly again to say, the whole reason why you eat food is to raise glucose levels in order to start glycolysis, and therefore the whole chain of events. So glycolysis in the cytoplasm, and then it goes to the mitochondria. So you have Krebs cycle and then oxidative phosphorylation in the electron transport chain, all to make ATP to keep you alive and to keep everything functioning in your body. Okay.
Or it has its own glycogen storage, and it will pump sugar out of the liver into the bloodstream to meet.
So this another word he said, gluconeogenesis, is just another way of making glucose from other sources like fats and protein. And I've just described it from fat. Okay.
Needs of the blood sugar needs. If we're following this whole pathway and you're at rest and you just ate all these carbs, the liver sees what it sees.
Okay, there's another thing, and I think he's saying so much that Jonathan isn't picking up. So the liver sees what it sees. Okay, so this is a metaphor for the liver, because the liver is the first organ that receives or encounters molecules from digestion. Okay, so when it's being he explains a little bit of the anatomy, but that's what he means when he says the liver sees what he sees. It's just sort of a metaphor that he's probably learned from his training or his studies, and that's what it means. So it's the first organ it sees because it filters the blood. So it's going to go to the liver first because the liver keeps you alive and stops toxins from getting in your body, or filters out toxins. Okay, that's the point of the liver.
The pancreas actually senses a disconnect between the rise in blood sugar in the portal vein and a not as high a blood sugar amount in the systemic circulation. And that seems to be the sensor that turns on the pancreas to start producing insulin. So insulin starts to release there. So if you were to graph this over a time curve, you would have an individual eat a meal, and then you would see their glucose in the, let's say we were doing systemic blood prips, for example, or blood draws. Okay, so you're not drawing from the portal circulation. You're drawing from the systemic circulation. And what you see is like blood sugar will start to rise, and there's a little bit of a lag, and then insulin starts to rise. And then as insulin does its thing and blood sugar starts to come down, insulin starts to come down. And the reason why we say things like, oh, fiber's good for you, or eat complex meals, or add protein and fat to the
it's beyond belief. Don't add fat. Okay. Don't add fat and protein to your meals to make them more healthy. Okay. So what does that even mean? I'd have to ask, because protein and fat, I mean, it's unbelievable. Okay. So you can't just add a single nutrient macronutrient. It has to be from the food that you're eating. And fat and protein increases insulin resistance, okay? Fat and protein increases with insulin resistance. It's ridiculous.
Is because those things slow that digestion and absorption rate, and it gives
the reason, so I'll just play that back again.
reason why we say things like, oh, fiber's good for you, or eat complex meals, or add protein and fat.
Okay. So protein, the reason why we add fiber, or fiber is good and why you need fiber in your diet, okay? So fiber is used by the good gut bacteria, so in your microbiome, in your intestines, and this helps to stop leaky gut, okay? So if you don't have enough fiber in your diet, then you'll suffer from leaky gut, okay? So in the intestines, you have these tight junctions, okay? So these are your cells in your intestine. So you imagine these two fists of anger are two cells. So there's only one cell thick. It's one cell thick in order to absorb nutrients. So you want these tight junctions not to be leaky. So bacteria, the human body can't process fiber. Fiber is sugar, but it's a form of sugar that we can't digest. But the bacteria living inside of your microbiome break it down and they produce fatty acids, okay? And these fatty acids that are being produced by the microbiome, they allow the body to make these tight junctions. And that stops essentially proteins leaking across into your bloodstream, into the cells. It stops, essentially, if it gets that bad, bacteria and pathogens, they can come across the cell and into your body where you don't want them. Okay, so that's why you need fiber, as well as you need fiber so that you don't get health concerns or diseases like Crohn's disease or diverticulitis, where because you don't have enough fiber in your diet, essentially the body has, when the muscles are squeezing, it doesn't have anything to squeeze against. So fiber makes your stool more watery as well, so you don't have to be constipated. So you're not constipated when you've got enough fiber. Okay, so that's why you need fiber, because it keeps you alive, and excess fat and excess protein kill you. Okay, so you don't need to be adding excess fat and protein. Let's carry on.
To the mix is because those things slow that digestion and absorption rate, and it gives you like a more manageable glucose curve. So this is what we call like a blood glucose spike, or what's called the glycemic index. How much of food causes a spike? But like the GI.
I guess glycemic index. So the glycemic index is a measure of how much glucose you have in the blood. Okay, so I would say, really, you should pay little attention to glycemic index. Okay, so I'm going to read you out some glycemic index of some foods here. Okay, so the lower the glycemic index, okay, it's the less sugar. Okay, and the higher the glycemic index, the more sugar. Okay, essentially, that's all you need to know. So chocolate cake, okay, has glycemic index of 38. Some shredded wheat, 83. So you got some egg. Fructose, a pure sugar, 19, and carrots, 92. Pizza Supreme, 30. Boiled potato, 101. Chocolate milk with sugar, 34. Corn Thins, 87. M&M's with peanuts, 33. Baked potato, 85. So can you see why why the glycemic index there doesn't make any sense, does it? To use it as a reference, because these are all sugary foods that are high in fat and high in protein, and they have a low GI. Whereas you have foods like a parsnip or a carrot or a baked potato or corn or brown rice or jasmine rice of 109 there, or cornmeal porridge. These are 2, 3, 4 times higher glycemic index. And these foods are not associated with you being unhealthy, is it? So you'd have to say a chocolate cake at 38 is going to do you damage, but jasmine rice 3-4 times higher glycemic index is not going to do the same damage as a chocolate cake, is it? So I just read off some notes here. So you need to realize that the GI is just a way of measuring different foods, and some GI indexes are different for different foods. For the same food, they're different. So the satiation index describes the effect of a food on the appetite. For example, potatoes are found to be twice as satisfying as meat or cheese. So you want your foods to be satisfying, okay? Satiating you. So the rise in insulin in the blood after a meal is measured as an insulin score. In this case, beef produces more insulin than whole wheat pasta, and cheese more than porridge. Insulin drives fat into fat cells, so having a high insulin score could be a disadvantage for someone trying to lose weight. And I promote weight loss. Okay? I promote weight loss and health gain on this channel. So, you need to understand that. Got a quote here from the American Diabetics Association. There is little evidence that total carbohydrate is associated with the development of type 2 diabetes. Rather, a stronger association has been observed between total fat and saturated fat and type 2 diabetes. Multiple studies have shown an inverse relationship between the amount of carbohydrate consumed and the development of diabetes. Populations of people worldwide who eat diets centered on high glycemic index carbohydrates like rice for rural Asians and potatoes for people in Peru are essentially free of diabetes. I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Right. So there's more here on the glycemic index. So the glycemic index is just another way to describe a functional effect of food on the body. Many popular diets, in particular those that promote high protein, high fat, meat and dairy eating, have placed the GI above all else in their plans to help you lose weight. To ignore the overall quality of food is unwise. The high GI carbohydrates found in foods like a potato or carrot do not make them any more unhealthy than do simple sugars found in fruits that make them unhealthy. Okay. So I don't know if I need to go over any more on the GI glycemic index. Now I've got some notes here. But essentially you can see foods that are high in fat and protein, they're still producing insulin. Okay, so the insulin score, this is another way you can measure foods, but it doesn't mention that. I'll carry on. Hope covered that enough.
A banana is completely different if it's covered in almond butter, for example. So there's it's a little bit of a story here. And so what happens is that blood sugar raises and then it starts coming back down in concert with insulin. The reason why I keep going back to this idea that
so he just said, I'll just replay that for you in case you missed it. He talks about adding almond butter to banana.
GI of a banana is completely different if it's covered in almond butter, for example. So there's it's a little bit of a story here. And so what happens is that blood sugar raises and then it starts coming back down in concert with insulin. The reason why I keep going back to this idea that...
So you need to understand that spikes don't mean anything. So glucose spikes, when you look at them and he's saying glucose spikes like this, okay, So firstly, just have the banana, okay? So a high glycemic index of banana doesn't mean anything, okay? But when you're adding fat, yeah, you are going to lower it. Just like if you have a fatty chocolate cake, that has a low glycemic index score. So, but you're not going to eat chocolate cake, are you? Because that's not healthy. So the thing that is healthy is fasting levels of glucose, okay? Not spikes. Spikes don't mean anything. It's the fasting levels, glucose levels, that are important, okay? And the almond butter, okay, is going to increase your insulin resistance, which means that you're going to, so increased levels of insulin resistance will lead to elevated fasting levels of glucose, and therefore you'll have more higher levels of insulin. So the answer is there, and it's just maddening, this video, really.
Rest, the idea of being in rest is super important because a lot of people misinterpret insulin as being just related to the management of blood sugar. And insulin is like one of the most powerful hormone in the body. Scientists will describe it as like when you pit insulin up against other hormones, insulin usually wins. If it's like these two things are present, insulin is the one that takes over. Like just the insulin signaling cascade is well characterized, it's well understood, it's very powerful. It's tied to anabolic processes more than what people realize, and growth signaling more than what people realize. Because
so he said there, so insulin is more anabolic, okay, than testosterone. So you need to understand that, for example, in the bodybuilding industry, some bodybuilders will actually inject insulin in order to make their bodies more anabolic. And some bodybuilders do actually die from that, okay? So you need to understand that, yeah, insulin is going to make your body more anabolic, and therefore you'll put on weight.
it's not just associated with regulating blood sugar, because and it makes a lot of sense that insulin's only released when they're.
So I've got more. I'm going to talk about mTOR now as well. So this is a pathway for the body to grow. So I'm going to go through my notes here and I'll tell you about mTOR and why you need to know about mTOR, okay? So he's talking about growth pathways in the body, okay? So mTOR is a nutrient-seeking pathway. So when he's talking about the body building new cells, making new cells,
high calories and high desire.
Get to that in a moment.
Associated with regulating blood sugar. Because
so mTOR is a nutrient-seeking pathway that tells your body's cells to grow and replicate. So you want to slow down mTOR. And this is because you want to slow down the rate of cancer and aging. So as an adult, you want your body to be in maintenance, so a maintenance mode. And this is when you're healthy. So this means that there is no abnormal cell proliferation, okay? So high fat levels, so high levels of fat, and especially animal protein, activate this mTOR. And this is because, so animal protein contains a high level of an amino acid called leucine, and also insulin resistance caused by excess dietary fat leads to increased insulin and insulin-like growth factor, and these both activate mTOR, okay? And leucine, the reason why I mentioned leucine is because this is a very powerful activator for mTOR, and you find leucine, a lot of leucine, in the amino acids that break down from animal proteins, okay? So if you want to increase your cell growth and cell proliferation in the body and make yourself age and get cancer, then you need to eat products that are high in fat and animal proteins, okay? So mTOR also suppresses the immune system because mTOR just tells the body, the cells of the body, right, we're just growing now and nothing else matters. So if you want to, again, increase your chance of getting a cancer, then suppress your immune system. Okay, so carbohydrates, so they slow down mTOR, and there's also fewer calories in carbohydrates, for example, like white rice, compared to your chocolate cake, which is high in fat calories. Okay, and caffeine also increases mTOR. Okay, because it increases chronic levels of cortisol in the body. Okay, so this is something that you need to know that he hasn't mentioned. So we'll carry on now. So when he's talking about these systems where insulin's telling your body to grow, then it's that.
And it makes a lot of sense that insulin's only released when there's high calories and high desirable calories, right? So high levels of carbohydrate, and the person is.
So high calories, there's in 1 gram of fat, there's 9 calories, and in 1 gram of sugar, so table sugar, there's 4 calories. So fat is the high calorie meal, and sugar is less than half. And again, if you're talking food like rice or potato, there's not even 1 calorie in 1 gram of these foods. These are low calorie foods. So the processed high fat meals have the most calories, and even the processed high sugar meals, they have less than half. So it's not
At rest. And those two conditions are only released when there's high calories and high desirable calories, right? So high levels of carbohydrate, and the person is at rest. And those two.
High desirable. So what are high levels? Why are high levels of carbohydrate desirable? Okay, so the primary energy system of the human body is glycolysis. Okay, so every cell in the human body runs on sugar, and therefore the reason why you eat is to raise blood glucose levels in order to fuel the system that I've talked about, glycolysis and the Krebs cycle. This is why you eat sugar, okay? Why you eat carbohydrate, and why you would die without it, because your brain runs on sugar, and your red blood cells don't have mitochondria, so they can only respire on glucose. Okay, they don't have mitochondria in them. So explain how you would run that on protein and fat. So the reason why carbohydrate is desirable is because it fuels your body and it keeps you alive. So your brain and your body is looking for sugar, and it's always looking for sugar. And the way that you satiate that is by eating carbohydrate, and therefore you are satiated. Okay, your body's not looking for fat and protein, it's looking to eat enough sugar and carbohydrates until it's got enough glucose.
Conditions are ripe conditions for growth and recovery. So you're getting so much more with insulin than blood sugar control. But what happens is when individuals are overconsuming in carbohydrates, they're overconsuming a lot of times in simple carbohydrates.
What on earth does over-consuming carbohydrate mean? So I think this is ridiculous and embarrassing for Kyle. What does that even mean? I mean, there's so many things in this video where it's like repeating sound bites that anyone in the street who doesn't have any education would say, oh, I'm over-consuming. The reason why you over-consume is because you're eating lots of fat and lots of protein. Your body's not satiated, and therefore you carry on eating to find the carbohydrates, and therefore you're putting on all this weight, you're becoming insulin resistant, and you're making yourself type 2 diabetic. So if you cut out the fat and the protein, you satiate yourself sooner, and also you're not eating as much of these calories. But calories don't mean anything if you're eating a high carbohydrate, low fat, low protein diet, because this is a low calorie diet, even if you're eating lots of it. But a high fat diet is lots of calories, even if you're not eating that much fat. As I've already said, 1 gram of fat is 9 calories, about 9 calories. 1 gram of sugar is more than half that.
So those blood sugar spikes are higher, and they're coming all throughout the day, right? So you wake up and you have breakfast, that's a spike. Then someone brought donuts to work, so that's a spike. Then you have lunch, and they're coming all throughout the day, right? So you wake up and you have breakfast, that's a spike. Then someone brought donuts to work, so that's a spike.
So donuts, okay, donuts are a high fat food, and therefore they increase insulin resistance. Okay, so I even went on Dunkin' Donuts website to look up the macronutrient breakdown, and they don't even show that on the website. You can't find the fat content of their donuts. Okay, you have to try and look somewhere else, and you don't know where. Somewhere else on a third-party website. I can't show that because it's not trusted. I can't trust that that's true. But a donut is a high-fat food, okay, with sugar. It's a blob of fat with sugar sprinkled on top, okay.
Then you have lunch, and that's a spike. Then you have like a Starbucks drink pick-me-up that has all the flavoring in it and stuff. That's a spike.
So I'm presuming that he's talking about coffee if it's Starbucks. Okay, so coffee will increase your cortisol levels, and that leads to increased sugar in the blood, and caffeine releases sugar in the blood because it's a stress response. Okay.
And someone has like chocolate laying around, that's a spike.
So it's not the sugar in it, that's the effects of hormones on your body.
You have dinner, that's a spike. Then you wait because you want your dinner to digest. Someone brought donuts to work, so that's a spike. Then you have lunch, and that's a spike. Then you have like a Starbucks drink pick-me-up that has all the flavoring in it and stuff. That's a spike. Then someone has like chocolate laying around. That's a spike. Then you
it's like, what the hell? Chocolate is a low GI food. It doesn't cause a spike. That's so stupid, isn't it? Chocolate is not a high GI food. So what spike is this?
dinner, that's a spike. Then you wait because you want your dinner to digest, and
And chocolate is also high in fat. This leads to insulin resistance. And, theobromine will, because it's a neurotoxin, it can affect people in different ways, but it can cause people's sleep to be ruined. And therefore, if you have ruined sleep, you'll increase your cortisol levels. And this will also raise your blood glucose levels. So
instead of like coupling dessert with your dinner, you wait an hour, then you eat ice cream. That's another spike. And so now you get this idea, right, where throughout the day you have, instead of like coupling dessert with your dinner, you wait an hour, then you eat ice cream. That's another spike. And so
again, ice cream is a high fat diet, a high fat food, and again, it's not a high GI food. It's not, because it's got loads of fat in it.
Now you get this idea, right, where throughout the day you have this like significantly like elevated level of blood sugar.
So I don't know what the spike is for chocolate and ice cream, and a donut is high fat, and these are high fat foods.
Plus you have this a lot of insulin. It's not the blood sugar itself that we're super concerned about in that case, because our body handles high blood sugar pretty well. This a lot of insulin. It's not you get this idea, right, where throughout the day, instead of like coupling dessert with your dinner, you wait an hour, then you eat ice cream. That's another spike. And so now you get this idea, right, where throughout the day.
So yeah, as I said, these are fatty foods, okay? So fat is increasing insulin resistance. And therefore your fasting blood glucose levels will remain higher. And therefore your insulin response will be increased. How confused are you now? So I hope that I'm helping to shed some light on what's going on. Okay, so we're about 10.5 minutes into this video, and I say I'm not going to go all the way. I'm just picking out points that I think need to be addressed.
Today you have this like significantly like elevated level of blood sugar. Plus you have this a lot of insulin. It's not the blood sugar itself that we're super concerned about in that case, because our body handles high blood sugar pretty well. People don't know when they're high in blood suger. They know when they're low, but you don't know, like, you can't go like, wow, I'm really feeling like I'm high in blood sugar. Like, it doesn't work like that. We don't have the sensor, because the body's built to deal with high blood sugar in a transient way. And so it's like this temporary thing that doesn't set off a lot of alarm bells.
So how many times do you hear people say, well, sugar made my kids go crazy? So there you go. He's answering that no, sugar isn't making you go crazy or your kids go crazy, because he's just said that you're built to deal with that sugar. So I'll just replay that because I think this is important.
this a lot of insulin. It's not the blood sugar itself that we're super concerned about in that case, because our body handles high blood sugar pretty well. People don't know when they're high in blood sugar. They know when they're low, but you don't know, like, you can't go like, wow, I'm really feeling like I'm high in blood sugar. Like, it doesn't work like that. We don't have the sense.
So, you know when you're low, okay? You know when you're low because this is called hypoglycemia, and because of the way the diet that's being recommended, which is a high fat, high animal protein diet, you are always tired because your body's not getting the sugar it needs, and therefore quite often you'll feel lethargic and chronically fatigued. And when your blood sugar levels are getting that low, you go into hypoglycemia. So literally people right now are, because people use the car as well so much because they're too tired to run or cycle maybe to work, they're literally crashing, they're falling asleep or passing out at the wheel, and hurting themselves and each other because they're hypoglycemic. So you know when you're hypoglycemic, so that's that. And yeah, hyperglycemic, this having chronically high levels of hyperglycemia, elevated levels of glucose in the blood, when it's constantly, so when you have elevated fasting levels of glucose, this is when your body gets damaged. So he's saying right there, he's answering his question, or he's answering himself, and I think he's a bit confused, and I think this is what confuses people. Okay, so we'll listen to this again.
Because our body handles high blood sugar pretty well. People don't know when they're high in blood sugar. They know when they're.
The body handles. There you go.
This a lot of insulin. It's not the blood sugar itself that we're super concerned about in that case, because our body handles high blood sugar pretty well. People don't know when.
The body handles high blood sugar pretty well, and the reason why you're getting high blood sugar chronically, elevated levels of high blood sugar, is because of fat and protein, high levels of fat and animal proteins, increasing your insulin resistance and therefore leading to elevated fasting levels of glucose.
High in blood sugar. They know when they're low, but you don't know, like, you can't go like, wow, I'm really feeling like I'm high in blood sugar. Like, it doesn't work like that. We don't have the sensor because the body's built to deal with high blood sugar in a transient way. And so it's like this temporary thing that doesn't set off a lot of alarm bells because it's normal. And so, but what's not normal is that number of times, that availability. And then the other thing is we're just.
What does that even mean? I'll play that again.
It doesn't set off a lot of alarm bells because it's normal. And so, but what's not normal is that number of times, that availability. And then
that number of times and that availability. So he's gone through a standard meal for people, okay? And saying these foods that cause spikes, which didn't even cause spikes, okay? So if you're eating a food plan like I would recommend, rice, fruit, and sugar, okay, your blood glucose levels will essentially just go like this. So if you can see, left to right or right to left, like this, okay? But if you're having these foods that cause these higher levels of insulin response because of the fats and proteins, your blood glucose levels go like this because of insulin resistance, okay? And also that leads to an increased insulin response.
The thing is we're just hammering all this energy and all these carbohydrates, but it's not coupled with it's not because it's normal. And so, but what's not normal is that number of times, that availability. And then the other thing is we're.
This isn't related to carbohydrate. Okay, the damage that is being caused in the body by diabetes, and you'll notice I keep repeating the same thing because the truth is just it doesn't change from one moment to the next. So it's not caused. So 30 seconds ago, diabetes wasn't caused by carbohydrate. Okay, and then 30 seconds from now, again, it won't be caused by carbohydrate. Because something is true, it stays the same, okay? So truth stays the same like your blood glucose levels when you're eating a high carbohydrate diet. It's like this, okay? So, yeah, it's all confusing, all of this stuff, this wording.
We're just hammering all this energy and all these carbohydrates, but it's not coupled with because it's normal. And so, but what's not normal is that number of times, that availability. And then the other thing is we're just
Again, that availability, I wish you would explain, and I wish Jonathan would pick up, rather than just laughing along. There would be maybe some devil's advocate, and he could sort of say, well, what does this mean, or introduce something else to maybe help Kyle explain what he means better, to get across the message better.
hammering all this energy and all these carbohydrates, but it's not coupled with it's not coupled with any like increase in output or increase in utilization, because individuals, the main thing,
the main energy system, the primary energy system of the human body is glycolysis, okay, fueled by carbohydrates, so sugar, glucose. So all carbohydrates are sugars, okay, and they fuel what keeps you alive. So glycolysis, as I've explained about how you use sugar in order to produce ATP, and yes, you can use fat and protein, but the primary energy system of the body is from glycolysis, fueled by glucose derived ATP. So I'm getting confused because I don't understand what he means. So using the word bombarding,
it's not coupled with it's not coupled with any like increase in output or increase in utilization, because individuals, the main thing that, and so it's like this temporary thing that doesn't set off a lot of alarm bells because it's normal. And so, but what's not normal is that number of times, that availability. And then the other thing is we're just hammering all this energy and all these carbohydrates, but
we're just hammering all this energy. Okay, it's about the type of food. Okay, it's the type of food. So yes, the body can use fat and protein as an energy source to make glucose. So he's already said earlier in the video, gluconeogenesis, so making sugar from other sources. But fat and protein come with so many terrible health consequences, like we're seeing, like diabetes is caused by all of this excess fat and protein. So carbohydrates, if you're eating a food plan based on rice, fruit, and sugar, there is some fat and some protein in rice, fruit, and fruit. Like you've got your omegas, for example, your healthy fats, which again isn't, healthy fats don't exist, okay? So fats we know are bad for you. They cause heart disease in excess, or the reason why people are suffering from heart disease. So in the West, 50% of people are suffering from heart disease. And what does the industry do in order to get people to start eating more fat and not be worried about their fat? They just go, well, let's stick healthy in front of fat and get people to eat more fat. And guess what? People eat more fat, okay? So they love to hear olive oil is great for them, is healthy. And you have to realize people at the marketing, nutritionists, health experts, or whoever it is, they're telling you good things about your bad habits in order for you not to change your lifestyle. Because at the end of the day, the world is a plutocracy, and money makes the world go round. So yes, it's horrific. Health is not important. And in fact, health is bad for business because, as I've said, if you're healthy, you don't have heart disease, you don't have cancer, you don't have diabetes, you don't have all of these chronic diseases that then someone can give you drugs for. If you just make a simple change that also, it's better for the planet, a plant-based diet. Animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change and biodiversity loss. And you're also saving money. So a plant-based diet, if you're living on rice, fruit, and sugar, is cheaper than your dairy and eggs and bacon and all of these other processed meats and animal products. So white rice is the cheapest food on the planet, okay?
Not coupled with it's not coupled with any like increase in output or increase in utilization because individuals that
I mean, it's just so wrong. As I've said, the reason why you're eating, you have a natural satiation point where you go, right, I'm done eating. And as I've said, that's because you want carbohydrates, because your body runs on sugar. Every cell in the body runs on sugar. And the reason why you keep looking for more and you keep eating, and it makes it seem like you're bombarding your body to keep eating, is because you're not satiated yet. Because you're removing carbohydrate and replacing it with fat and protein. Okay.
the main thing that is tied to type 2 diabetes development are two things: obesity and inactivity, and so or lack of physical exercise.
Hallelujah! He's finally said it.
Individuals, the main thing that is tied to type 2 diabetes development are two things: obesity and inactivity. And
I'll play that one more time, okay, so you can hear it. He finally says it after all of this waffle. Okay.
Individuals, the main thing that is tied to type 2 diabetes development are two things: obesity and inactivity, and so or lack.
The main thing: obesity, fat. Okay, so he just listed off a bunch of fatty foods. Okay, so he listed off a bunch of fatty foods, and he keeps talking about fatty foods that have sugar sprinkled on them, like the donut. I love hearing that, the donut, because it's just, for me, it's like an IQ sieve. So if you say the donut is causing you diabetes because it's sugary, it's almost like one of those sayings that people say where it's like I tick it off and go, yeah, they know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're talking about. The donut, I love it because I hear it doesn't matter if you have supposedly an MD or a PhD or whether you're just whoever you are in society, you're just someone on the street. Everyone is unified in saying the donut because it's sugary gives you diabetes. Okay, it's the fat. And yeah, it's a great IQ test. So go and ask, you talk about it with someone, diabetes with someone, and then get them to say the donut or talk about the donut. And yeah, you don't need to go and do an IQ test, just mention the donut. So he's mentioned fats, and then he's mentioned you're hammering carbohydrates, which you're hammering carbohydrates. So, if your car runs on petrol and you put diesel in it, and you break your car because you put the wrong fuel in it, stop putting diesel in your petrol car or petrol in your diesel car. Or even better, get a bicycle, and stop burning oil in your car and start burning fat on your body. Okay?
Physical exercise. And you typically see both those things, although some of them aren't related. Particularly, you could be insulin resistant and actually be pretty lean.
So I'm going to play that one more time because he waffled on and then finally said it.
Thing that is tied to type 2 diabetes development are two things: obesity and inactivity. And
obesity. So I think this is a very insidious thing to say because he, without him saying directly, well, carbohydrate is making you fat. He's talking about you hammering carbohydrates and then saying obesity. So this is insidious because he's suggesting that carbohydrate, sugar, is making you obese and therefore that's making you diabetic. Which is, I don't know if it's because it's the textbooks he learned from or whether it's just, if it's the textbooks he learned from, then I understand that the information is biased. But if it's not, then you need to realize that this information is wrong, okay? And it's going to lead to people getting sick. Because if you put the diesel in the petrol car and then say it was someone else kicked my tire or something and damaged my car, no, you're damaging it, okay? So sugar And I've got another video on the channel talking about why sugar is not making you fat. Okay, sugar is not making you fat. In fact, sugar makes you lean. So I was 62.8 kilos this morning at 5'11" on a high sugar diet. Okay, and you can probably see from my lean cheeks, I'm not fat, and I don't exercise like a professional athlete. I'm not doing I'm not doing excessive exercise. Like I'm not like I have excessive carbohydrates, as Kyle would say, but I'm not training excessively. Okay, so the fat you eat is the fat you wear, and the sugar you eat keeps you alive and powers every cell in the human body.
So, or lack of physical exercise. And you typically see both those.
And you don't need to be a world-class endurance athlete in order to not be diabetic and to be lean and healthy.
With it's not coupled with any like increase in output or increase in utilization, because individuals, the main thing that is tied to type 2 diabetes development are two things: obesity and inactivity, and so, or lack of physical exercise. And you typically see both those things, although.
And I've already mentioned in the video about population studies, for example, like the rural Chinese, they're not all going around doing 500 miles a week on their bicycles. They're all lean, and they don't have a exercise coach telling them how they need to structure their cycling or their running. They just eat lots of carbohydrates and just live their daily lives. They're not all professional cyclists or runners or have these programs to get themselves fit and lean. They just eat lots of carbohydrate, low fat, low protein, and that keeps them lean, keeps them from not being diabetic. Okay, so this obesity and sedentary behavior is the standard Western lifestyle. It's a diet with the lifestyle. Okay, so the diet that causes you to be obese, high fat, high animal protein, and low sugar, low carbohydrate, along with a prison system of the 9 to 5, drink coffee, take drugs, drive your car everywhere, a car dependent, drug dependent world. And you put these together and you become obese and you become sedentary. So I live in the UK and people hate the bicycle and they love the car. And just like in America and a lot of Western countries, the society, the culture is based on the car. It's the symbol of success, and the bicycle is the symbol of peasantry and communism, and it's also divides people because they so you can see how there's a lot more to all of this than just carbohydrate is making you fat. Okay, carbohydrate is not making you fat.
Some of them aren't related. Particularly, you could be insulin resistant and actually be pretty lean, especially if you're very inactive. You just may regulate your weight a little bit better, but you can still suffer from insulin resistance. This is my.
Okay, you stop it again there. Okay, everyone has a different threshold for how much fat they can store on their body. Okay, so this is because everyone has a different number of fat cells. We're all genetically essentially almost the same. So there's a very, very small genetic difference between, us and our next closely related species on this planet. So then there's only about, I think it's 1% or so, around that. So within human to human, it's very small. So just a small percentage change in fat cells between different people means that someone who looks fairly lean, they don't look overweight particularly, they can be pre-diabetic because they might still have ectopic fat. So this is when they still have fat. A thin person, they'll have fat in other places around the body. For example, on the heart or in their pancreas. Okay. So this is the non-fat adipose fat. So it should just be stored where the body naturally should put it. So that's the fat adipose tissue. And then ectopic fat is where it's elsewhere, where you don't want it, and where it's going to cause you chronic diseases. And then you can see someone who might be, so an adult male might be, 160, 170 pounds or like 70, 80 kilos. And then you might have another adult male who's the same height and weighs maybe 300 pounds or 170 kilos or however much. And they are not diabetic because they just have the ability genetically, and they're not predisposed to become diabetic at a lower weight. So that's that reason, okay? And another reason is because if you're eating a high fat, so I'll just replay that.
Particularly, you can be insulin resistant and actually be pretty lean, especially if you're very inactive. You just may regulate your weight a little bit better, but you can still suffer from insulin resistance.
So if you're eating a high fat meal and you're constantly eating high fat meals and high animal protein meals, you're insulin resistant. But if you are counting calories, so you're starving yourself to, 1,500 calories, for example, then yes, the combination of starving yourself, which is what counting calories is, and I never recommend it, okay? Calorie counting is starvation, and calorie deficit is starvation, which is obviously not healthy, and I don't recommend it. If you're still eating a high fat meals, you are insulin resistant. You have insulin resistance. I keep saying the same thing over and over again because it's so ridiculous. So yes, he's answering it, but he's saying the answers that he's using to show that carbohydrate is what causing you to be diabetic is the answer. So he's even said someone who, let's replay again.
Obesity and inactivity, and so, or lack of physical exercise. And you typically see both those things, although some of them aren't related. Particularly, you can be insulin resistant and actually be pretty lean, especially if you're very inactive. You just may regulate your weight a little bit better, but
you may regulate your weight a bit better. Yeah, you starve yourself on a high fat diet. Okay, it's simple, obvious.
You'll suffer from insulin resistance. This is my interpretation of this, and I want to be super clear. I probably should have led with this. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a researcher.
So just play that again.
Active. You just may regulate your weight a little bit better, but you can still suffer from insulin resistance. This is my interpretation of this, and I want to be super clear. I probably should have led with this. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a researcher.
I am not a medical doctor. Okay, so I'm gonna explain this to people because a lot of people, because they've never been to medical school, or they don't know people who are doctors or family or friends. If you're just going to medical school and you're doing just this, standard medical degree, like all MDs have to, you don't get taught about nutrition. The standard medical education does not tell you about what you should eat to be healthy, okay? So basically what you do is you go to university, you pay a lot of money, and you learn how the body works, and you learn about all of these chronic diseases. And you are not given the tools that you need in order to help people fix their chronic diseases, and that is diet. So if you read through all the medical textbooks, I have them here around me, they'll be full of this is how heart disease, this is what heart disease is, this is what cancer is, this is what atherosclerosis is. And they don't say if you eat a low fat, low protein, plant-based, vegan, no oil diet, which is healthy for you, the planet, and cheaper than probably what you're already eating, there would be no medical business. There'd be no doctors. Okay, because everyone is suffering. Most people are suffering from chronic disease caused by their diets, okay? So yes, there would be some doctors who would deal with trauma. You know, if people fall down, they break their bones, and people need to literally be put back together. But most diseases and ill health is caused by your diet, okay? Diabetes, heart disease, cancer, these are all linked to the SAD diet. SAD. So I want people to know this because this is very important, okay? So your physician, your MD, your GP, or your primary care physician, or whoever, unless they physically have gone themselves and thought, right, I need to learn about nutrition, I need to learn about, well, what is causing diabetes rather than what is diabetes, okay? So MDs, they know what they are, but they do not know how to cure them other than giving you drugs. And there's never been a case of diabetes cured by a doctor giving them drugs. You've still got diabetes, they're just treating the symptoms of diabetes. They're not treating the cause of diabetes, okay? MDs don't treat the cause of all of these chronic diseases like heart disease, and we're talking about diabetes in this one, okay? So you need to understand this. So if you say, well, you're not an MD, so I'm not going to listen to you, it's all the same education for all medical doctors. They have to decide, oh, well, I want to know more. I want to know why people are getting diabetes rather than just giving them drugs. I want to make them healthy, and I actually want to treat the cause. Well, most doctors, they don't. So go to your doctor, okay? Ask them what causes diabetes and heart disease. Ask them to explain, like I've shown you about insulin resistance. Go to them and ask them what causes diabetes. They're not going to tell you because all they want to do, they need to make money to keep a roof over their head, to send their children through to what become doctors as well, or whatever they want to do, and buy the car and luxury goods and live a high standard of living and have that position in society, okay? So understand how the world works and don't be fooled by being argued to from a point of a position of authority. And what I mean by that is, just because someone has an MD, they say to you, I'm a medical doctor, listen to me. Well, ask them, how does the world work? And when I mean how does the world work, ask them actually, how are these diseases, chronic diseases? Why, as Kyle said at the beginning of the video, why did we not see them in the past?
But I did study
recent
type 2 diabetes.
Okay. And why do we see them today, especially in the West? And by the way, the pharmaceutical industry is where the chronic diseases are. So the pharmaceutical industry essentially exists here in the Western world and doesn't exist in the rice paddies in China, for example, where they're still just eating white rice because there aren't loads of sick people. So you need to stop putting the cart before the horse, so to speak, and think, well, the reason why there are loads of people, why the pharmaceutical industry exists here, is because sick people exist, and therefore the pharmaceutical industry can exist. So if there's no sick people, the pharmaceutical industry can't exist. Okay? So literally, you don't need to have a doctor somewhere in rural China to treat chronic diseases. And about 80-90%, I don't know off the top of my head, but the vast majority of these that doctors will see is diseases that can be treated simply through a lifestyle change. So if you say, I'm never going to give up my meat, I'd rather die than give up my meat, you will die. Okay? So the animal died for you, and then you will kill yourself through eating the standard American diet. Okay? So don't be another statistic of the standard American diet or the Western diet. and just think, do I want to live? Am I worth saving myself? And think, well, yes, because what's the point otherwise?
Use insulin resistance and insulin dynamics. That's what my PhD was on, and I did a lot of work in that area for my master's work as well. But this is not medical advice; it's just scientific information. So what happens?
Oh dear. So I'm gonna go through some. So just replay that. I'm gonna go through some actual scientific information, and hopefully Kyle can go away and read this as well, and the people who are watching us can go away and read this. And I'm gonna give you an education, a little education, on the information that Kyle should have read while he was doing his
Dynamics. That's what my PhD was on, and I did a lot of work in that area for my master's work as well. But this is not medical advice; it's just scientific information. So what?
Okay. So in 1927, Shirley Sweeney asked his medical students. So this is all. So I'm going to talk about Shirley Sweeney, Walter Kempner, and Harold Percival Hemsworth. Okay, because you need to know this. This is the base. These I'm going to read out these 3 studies. These are the base, the foundations for everything that Kyle is talking about and not talking about. Okay, so in 1927, Shirley Sweeney asked his medical students to volunteer for some studies. So this consisted of being fed a high carbohydrate diet for 2 days. This diet consisted of sugar, candy, white bread, baked potatoes, syrup, rice, and oatmeal. All the students tested normal. They were not diabetic. Then the students were then tested on a high-fat diet for 2 days. This included olive oil, so there's your healthy fat again. Olive oil is not healthy, okay? No oil is healthy. Butter, egg yolk, mayonnaise, and cream. All of the students were diabetic after the high-fat meal. Okay, so go away and read this paper. It's from 1927. That's 100 years ago. Essentially, that's 100 years ago, okay, that Shirley Sweeney was putting this together, and Kyle still hasn't. So Harold Percival Hemsworth, okay, another very important scientist, human being. So this Hemsworth is the father of diabetes, okay? And you notice he's not mentioned any of these names, Sweeney or Hemsworth. So in 1936, okay, I'm going to shout it in a minute. 1936, he discovered the difference between insulin sensitive and insulin insensitive diabetes, okay? So essentially he discovered type 2 diabetes, essentially, and he recommends a diet, a food plan, as you might want to, as I prefer to call it, based on carbohydrates. He found that high-fat diets cause sensitivity to decrease, i.e., your sensitivity disappears, it becomes insensitive, and therefore your insulin resistance, you become insulin resistant, okay, through a high-fat diet. And I'm going to come out of this format again and talk to you about, for a moment anyway, about the most important scientist that has ever lived, okay? Walter Kempner. And I'm going to talk to you, I'm going to come out of this for 2 minutes, tell you about Walter Kempner, and then we'll get back to the video, okay? Walter Kempner is the most important scientist that's ever lived that you've never heard of. So he's the most important scientist that has ever lived, firstly, and you've never heard of him. Okay, so Walter Kempner was a German scientist who used diet therapy for 7 decades at Duke University in North Carolina in America. And that was a diet therapy based on white rice, fruit juice, and white table sugar. And he treated chronic diseases. And people came from miles around to be treated by Walter Kempner on the rice diet. Okay, the rice diet. And this is what I base my diet plans and my lifestyle on. So Walter Kempner cured 100% of cases of type 2 diabetes on a diet based on 94%. So I just rub that out. 94%. So that is of protein, fat, and sugar. Out of 100%, 94% of it was on sugar. He cured type 2 diabetes with white table sugar. Okay, let that sink into your brain. Okay, Walter Kempner treated over 18,000 people. He's the doctor that treated more patients, more people in person, face to face, or in person, than any other doctor that's ever lived. The only other doctor that's treated more people than Walter Kempner is Dr. John McDougall, because he also has an internet presence. But the doctor who's treated the most people and made them healthy, just like John McDougall, Dr. John McDougall, is Walter Kempner. From 1939, for 7 decades, before the pharmaceutical industry existed, and when people had no cure. And drugs do not cure chronic diseases, they just treat the symptoms. There's never been a single case of diabetes cured with a drug, with a diabetic drug. Okay. So, sugar does not cause diabetes. It reverses it. So go and look at Walter Kempner and stop being fat, sick and stupid and gullible. Okay. So here's another important case study or population study that you need to know to show that, genetics, it's my genetics that causes me to be diabetic. Well, this is just a population study that you need to know. So in North America, the Pima and the Tarahumara, I think that's how you pronounce them, these used to be adjacent populations, okay? So they were genetic cousins of each other. But after the Mexican-American War of 1848, Arizona and Mexico were separated. Okay, so this is world history and understanding of what's happened in the world. So the Pima, they moved into Arizona. So if you know the geography, go and look up the geography of America, Mexico, and the USA. So the Pima, they moved into Arizona, and the Tarahumara, they stayed in, I think it's Tarahumara, stayed in Mexico along the Sierra Madre, I think Sierra Madre Mountains. And the Pima and the Pima and the Tarahumara used to both eat very similar diets, okay? So they both used to eat high carbohydrate diet. So, however, the Pima now, they live on the standard American diet. They've been Americanized. And they now suffer terribly from chronic diseases. So they have a incredibly high level of diabetes, more so than the rest of the standard, the average of the rest of the USA. Essentially, they're getting fat and they're dying. Whereas the Tarahumara, who used to be, right next to each other, eating the same, living essentially the same lifestyle, the Tarahumara are world famous athletes, okay? So they're famous because people go and it draws people from all around the world. They're famous for doing these 100-mile runs where they run 100 miles or in a day, or 50 miles in a day, or 100 miles in a day, back to back to back. And their diet is mostly on corn, and they don't have diabetes. Okay? The standard American diet is killing the PEMA, and the high carbohydrate, low fat, low protein diet that they traditionally ate, which their genetic cousins, the Tarahumara, are eating, they're renowned for their health, their physical activity, and they don't have diabetes. So high fat animal diet, protein diet. I can't get the words out. It's so annoying to see this terrible health consequences. A high fat and high animal protein diet kills you, and the foods that we're meant to eat are carbohydrates, low protein, low fat. It's all there. If you make the connection rather than being fooled into just destroying your health. Okay, so look up Walter Kempner and the PEMA population in the USA and look what they look like. Anyway, let's get back to the video. Welcome back. So let's carry on.
Bombarding the system with energy and growth signals, but there's nothing to respond or adapt to. Those growth signals actually become a risk because you're just saying grow, 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 and the cell is saying, I don't know what I'm responding to. I don't know what the growth is. We all doesn't know where to grow. Yeah, we all know that just eating cow's meat doesn't fuse that muscle to your muscle and make your muscles bigger. Like it's
Don't tell the gym bros.
Yeah, it's not like you're not directly.
Okay, so that's not funny. Okay. This joke about the cow's meat. Okay. Why are you laughing? I suppose is what I have to ask them. Okay. So cow's meat is a carcinogen. Okay. We know that meat. There's different classifications of carcinogens, but we know that meat and dairy, there's evidence, we see it, it's right in front of us. It's linked to cancer, okay? So I promote a plant-based diet, okay? A plant-based diet, therefore, will decrease your chance of getting cancer, okay? So yes, if you eat a kilo of steak every day, you will not gain a kilo of muscle. The reason why you put muscle on is not protein. Protein does not build muscle, okay? Your muscles are made of amino acids, made up of the foundation, amino acids, they make proteins. But literally, having a kilo of protein from your steak that's giving you cancer doesn't make you look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, okay? Or perhaps someone who you idolize that you want to look at. So if I, for example, so I'm 62.8 kilos, if I ate the same amount of protein that I do, which I might average about 50 grams or so a day, something like that, primarily from my white rice. If I started injecting myself with testosterone, then I would get bigger. My muscles would get bigger and my weight would go up, but I wouldn't be eating more protein. Okay, so hormones, the hormone balance in your body and the hormone makeup of the body. If you're more anabolic, you have more testosterone, insulin, makes your weight go up, you gain muscle. And if you're catabolic, you lose weight and you become leaner. And being leaner is more healthy in the long run. So if you're talking about longevity, then no. And also, if you're eating cow's meat, you're going to increase your insulin resistance. You're going to decrease sensitivity. And therefore, you're going to have a longer insulin response, okay? So, everything is just, I don't know, ridiculous. And this video is probably getting on now, so you're hearing the same thing, aren't you, from me, and the same thing from Kyle. And Jonathan just keeps laughing at everything and isn't never stopping to ask, what does any of this mean? Or being devil's advocate, okay? And a the animal high protein diet from cows, from animal agriculture, is destroying the planet and is destroying your health. So them laughing, don't like it, okay? Don't like it. And it's laughing at all of the health consequences. People watching the video that are type 2 diabetic or worried about their weight or their health, and they're laughing, having a nice giggle. I think it's appalling.
Like, you're breaking it down into its principal components so you can respond to the stimulus that you've applied to your system. But if there's been no physical...
It's like, if I go out and I talk to someone in the street and we have a laugh and a joke and a giggle, and it's like, this is meant to be educational. This isn't like going and meeting your mate for a pint or whatever. This is going out to tens of thousands of people. So I think there's different standards of behavior that you have to keep. So I want to try and remain, unbiased, telling you the scientific evidence. I will introduce a joke when I think it's needed, and when it doesn't compromise the message that I'm trying to give. Okay, so family friendly humor, joking about dead animals, people eating dead animals, is not family friendly humor, and it's not humor. It's not funny.
Activity stimulus applied to your system, then you have nothing to kind of respond to. So all your daily housekeeping and things like that and functionality within the cells is being more than met by fat stores and the carbohydrates that it's seeing, but it keeps getting hit with this inference signal, grow. You've applied to your system. But if there's been no physical activity stimulus applied to your system, then you have nothing to kind of respond to. So all your daily housekeeping and things like that.
You don't need to do 1,000 miles a day. It's ridiculous. Yeah, you don't need to do 10 miles a day, 30 miles a day, 50 miles a day, if you are to stay healthy, okay? So yes, exercise is amazing. I believe that life is movement and movement is life, okay? So that's why I love cycling, because it gives you adventure and freedom that nothing else in the world gives you. And pair that with a good food plan of rice, fruit and sugar. The world is your adventure, okay? But you don't need... If you don't exercise, you won't get diabetes, okay? It won't kill you from not exercising. The diet kills you, okay? So you can still be healthy and lean, and yes, it helps doing exercise, because it also helps your mood, reduces stress. All of these amazing positive health consequences of exercise and cycling. But you don't need to be a professional cyclist or a budding amateur cyclist, or even just someone who does 5 miles a day. You can still be... You're not going to get diabetes from not exercising. It's the diet. High fat, high animal protein, but primarily high fat, which I keep... What's the word you use? Ramming, or whatever the word, carbohydrates. Well, I'm ramming down not to eat fat, okay?
Functionality within the cells is being more than met by fat stores and the carbohydrates that it's seeing, but it keeps getting hit with this inference signal, grow. Okay, and what happens eventually is the cell says, I'm not listening to you. I'm done listening to insulin. It's telling me to do all this stuff. It's giving me this growth signal, and I have nothing to respond to. So it's kind of like, and there's so many different analogies in terms of and it's very reductionist, but because we're complex biological systems, not like mechanical machines. But there's all kinds of your boss is telling you to be more productive, but he's not giving you any you don't even know what product that the company is making, but they're saying grow. So what happens is eventually the cells revolt, and they say, we're done listening to insulin because this is risking us now. You're turning on all these transcription factors. Nobody knows what's happening. You're causing all these different things to occur, which bombarding the system with growth signals, the absence of a stimulus to grow, is a risk for mistakes. This
is mTOR. Okay, so you need to talk about mTOR. And the reason why it's happening is because of fat. Carbohydrate. If you ate a high carbohydrate diet, so the truth about carbs for cyclists, if you want to not be diabetic and not get cancer and not get heart disease and not get diabetes and not get atherosclerosis and not get kidney failure, then a high carbohydrate, low fat, low protein diet. The video would have ended after 30 seconds. He would have gone, eat carbs and low fat, low protein, plant-based, no oils, exercise, as much or as little as you want. Enjoy life, don't destroy the planet. And that would be it. That is how you should live your life, okay? And TrainerRoad would there'd be no more videos, okay?
The underlying benefits of intermittent fasting. When we fast for 18 to 24 to 48 hours, insulin goes down, and insulin-like growth factor, which is an insulin-like hormone produced directly in the liver, those things start to go down, and the cells have a chance to sort of do their housekeeping and not just got bombarded with and all these different types of things. And there's a gentleman I worked with when I was at USC not long ago.
So if you're eating a high-fat meal in the morning and a high-fat meal at lunch and a high-fat meal in the evening, guess what happens to your insulin? It goes woo, and it stays up, okay? Because your insulin resistant.
And he
fat. I keep saying the same thing, okay? So I don't need to say it again, but in case you missed it for the thousandth time, it's fat.
A really elegant way of writing.
And like I've mentioned, where these people, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, look at the papers. Look at the difference between a carbohydrate meal and a high-fat meal, between the different levels, okay? So Kyle keeps talking about what a high-fat meal is doing and not the reality, okay? So he's saying that he's talking sometimes correctly about the wrong thing, okay? So it's fat that is causing all of these problems, okay?
Explaining about this scientifically, and so if people want to learn more about this, you can go look at his work. It's really
yeah. So look at whoever that is, great, but Kempner and Sweeney and Himsworth, and there's a bunch of other papers as well. If you look up the low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet, okay, and look how healthy it is, and look at the epidemiological studies, and look at the China study and the blue zone of Okinawa, and I'm going to get on to the Pima. Okay, I'm going to talk about the Pima population and what's happened to them.
Learn a lot from him, and that sort of idea of too much growth signaling and how fasting may regulate that growth signaling and how that may have implications for a variety of different
growth signaling again. mTOR, say it. Okay, say mTOR.
Things is kind of my focus at USC. This is in my wheelhouse in terms of that stuff. Eventually, the cells start saying, I don't want to do this anymore, insulin. And insulin says, no, you're going to do it. And so the pancreas just keeps pumping out more and more insulin. And meanwhile, our blood sugar keeps going up and up. And for a while, hyperinsulinemia can compensate for an increase in insulin resistance. But the cells are super stubborn. They know what's good for them. And eventually, you develop resistance to insulin. And
what? What? Yeah. So if the textbooks say one thing, go and look and read the actual scientific studies, because guess what? You'll find that they don't agree with the textbooks. And why is that? Vested interests. Vested interests. Okay.
And basically, my interpretation of this is that the body would rather, it's basically saying having high blood sugar is less harmful than pulling all the sugar into cells and firing all these growth pathways just unregulated with no stimuli, right? Interesting. And so it's a lot of people think of this as
so that's the only thing Jonathan's now said. Interesting. So I get that a lot when I'm trying to explain. Oh, interesting. Yeah. I have no idea what you're talking about. What is the translation? Okay. So either get interesting or good luck with that. Okay, so as in, I tell them about how the world works and they don't want to be diabetic. Oh, good luck with that. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so he says my interpretation. So I'm going to explain to you why naturally you would have insulin resistance is natural. Okay, so the malnutrition caused by the high fat. So he said his opinion, or his whatever, what he used.
Growth pathways, just unregulated with no stimuli, right? Interesting. And so it's a lot of people think of this as I remember having a really interesting conversation then pulling all the sugar into cells and firing all these growth pathways, saying having high blood sugar is less harmful. Interpretation of this is that
my interpretation. Okay, so yeah, you can say everything that I've said is my opinion. Well, good luck with that and getting diabetes on not following my opinion. Okay, so the malnutrition caused by the high-fat, low-fiber Western diet places serious burdens on the body and requires it to make adaptations in order to survive under adverse conditions. The fat calories consumed in excess of our needs causes us to gain fat, which is natural, okay? And it's an expected change, and it's what would happen naturally in the wild before modern times, okay? Soon a point is reached when this accumulation becomes counterproductive, a point when any further excess body weight is likely to cause serious physical health, okay? Which is what we're seeing on the SAD diet. When this hazardous excess is reached, the body puts the brakes on in order to slow the rate of gain. This is accomplished by a variety of changes that cause the hormone insulin to become less potent. In other words, our cells become resistant to the actions of the fat-gaining hormone insulin, a state referred to as insulin resistance. One of insulin's primary jobs is to push fat into the cells, thus saving fat for the day when no food is available, which for you in your daily life is never going to happen, okay? We live in a world of excess. We don't live a hunter-gatherer life where we're surviving day to day. Instead, we're filling our bodies with fat and killing ourselves, okay? If it were not for the adaptive mechanisms which allow for the development of insulin resistance, people would commonly expand until they became so large that they could not get out of bed or fit through a doorway. And you see this, a very rare condition that does occur in 1,000 pounds, or however much is that, 700 kilos or whatever, pound-sized people who need a forklift to move them to hospital. And you see that in the headlines, don't you? That's all you see is these people that are the size of the Death Star. And not the original Death Star, but the one from the 100th Star Wars movie where it's bigger and bigger and bigger. So one of insulin's other important jobs is to let sugar into the body's cells. With a state of insulin resistance, the sugar cannot get into the cells easily, so it rises in the blood. The hallmark of the diagnosis of diabetes is an elevated blood sugar above normal. And I'm not going to give you a number because I'm going to talk about that in a moment. That's been coming down over the last 50, 60, 70 years, okay, to get people more people on diabetic drugs. With the impotent insulin, the calories of fat and sugar we consume cannot easily enter the cells. The body is essentially starving itself from the inside in a desperate attempt to compensate for the overfeeding coming from the outside. To further reduce the burden of obesity, the body eliminates calories by allowing sugar to spill over into the urine, like water falling over a dam. So, in the past, diabetes has been known as, you might have heard of it as the sugar disease, which I say it's not, because literally one of the ways that you could test if someone was diabetic hundreds of years ago was, is their pee, their urine sweet, because it's got sugar in it, because of, well, rarely type 1, but because then, like, human physiology has not changed. If you're type 2 diabetic 300 years ago, it's for the same reason you're diabetic now, which is excess fat, okay, and you die. At this stage, sugar is found with a urine test, another way to diagnose diabetes, okay. Most doctors and patients view the elevated blood sugar as the enemy to be beaten down with medications. The result is a fat, sickly patient with a slightly lower blood sugar, okay. So he talked about his interpretation, okay, of what he thinks resistance is, okay. And that's another interpretation based on science, okay, based on a continuing on from what I've been talking about, and that's how that all fits together, okay.
The body would rather, it's basically saying having high blood sugar is less harmful than pulling all the sugar into cells and firing all these growth pathways just unregulated with no stimulant, right? Interesting.
So, interesting, blah, blah, blah.
So it's like...
Interesting, blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. I have no idea what's going on. Yeah, this is mTOR, okay? Caused by fat, animal protein, leads to insulin resistance, elevated levels of insulin like growth factor. This is what he's talking about. So he, presumably, Cal knows about mTOR, I think, because it's sort of describing it in a way.
People think of this as like, I remember having a really interesting conversation in a graduate class where the professor was leading this conversation about like, I think the topic was like, is insulin resistance protective? And we started having this whole like conversation.
Yes, to a degree, like I've just said. Yes, it is to a degree. Okay.
About what are the ways, like, how is this explainable? Because we just think of it as being harmful, but is it actually protecting us from something that is worse? Because the signals aren't adding up. And this is why I like to describe it as like metabolic dysregulation as opposed to some sort of deficiency.
Yes, it's a dysregulation of the mitochondria caused by fat. Okay, so if you poured sugar, you pour your petrol into your petrol car, and you say, well, the petrol in my petrol car is destroying my engine because, well, I've put too much fuel in. Okay, so sugar is the fuel for your metabolism, okay? So naturally you do have a high metabolism. Everyone should have a high metabolism, a healthy metabolism. But the excess fat is slowing it down, because if you're disrupting your metabolism, it's a metabolic disease, like you said, it's the fat. Okay? It's this. Insulin resistance, and it disrupts the electron transport chain.
Or shortcoming. It's dysregulation in essence. And so then you get all these different things. Now, insulin is really difficult to measure in the bloodstream. It just is. You have to take like full blood. It's not that it's not difficult. It's not as accessible as blood sugar. Got it. Okay. So when you get insulin, and again, insulin is so transient. It's kind of regulatory with another hormone that's released by the pancreas called glucagon, and it's moving around a lot. And so using that as like a diagnostic criteria is not great, because with blood draws you just get in a point in time, and it's hard to interpret.
So I might skip this video forward just to the last few points, because I say it's a long video, so I think I'm just gonna skip it forward.
There's a lot of really interesting stuff around like estrogen and testosterone now, where like we know what the shortfalls are of grabbing that at a point in time, and all the like complex regulation about free testosterone and sex hormone binding globulin and all these other factors you have to take into account. So when you're interpreting blood work, they only have 2 years. Med students have 2 years before residency or before their first their first I forget what they call it, clinical, to learn everything they need to know about every human disease that exists and how to deal with it. Right? This is the job of med schools. The first 2 years of med schools is show up, take a whole bunch of books, put the funnel on the ear, and pour them in. And so and they have to.
Yeah, you're learning about the world, the health world. You're not learning about how to treat the cause. You're treating the symptom.
To optimize processes. And so what happens is that you end up with these cutoffs or reference ranges, and you look at blood work and you see it, and it means certain things. So A1C is show up, take a whole bunch of books, put the funnel on the ear, and pour them in. And
yeah, you're not learning. The funnel isn't funneling information in order to say, well, this is how we're going to treat all of these chronic diseases, and therefore, well, you're fired, because instead of there being millions or thousands of doctors in order to treat this unhealthy population, the population is now healthy. Oh, and now there's no doctors because everyone's healthy.
And they have to optimize processes. And so what happens is that you end up with these cutoffs or reference ranges, and you look at blood work and you see it, and it means certain things. So A1C means this, insulin means this, but really you're not.
A1C, it means nothing in these athletes. Okay.
Into consideration individuality, and you're not taking into consideration that you have to grab everybody because you're responsible for seeing everybody and helping everybody's health. And I'm not faulting, like, we have to do that. So when you start just like kicking and looking at different blood parameters, but you're not taking into consideration, well, were you fed or fasted? Was it the morning or the afternoon? What was training the day before? A continuum. This is another thing. Shout out to Dr. Chris Nelby, who I trained with on a continuum, not as a cutoff. But you just don't have time to do that if you're interpreting.
Here we go.
And this is another thing. Shout out to Dr. Chris Nelby, who I trained with at Colorado State, who's like one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. And he would kind of explain it as like, we have to think about these things as like
Okay. There are smart people, and they also include people who lived in the past, okay? So if you are to ignore the people and the information that came before you and the people that are around you, is to live like a child, because you don't know what's come before. So we stand on the shoulders of giants from information, like Sweeney and Kempner. Hemsworth. And there's other people as well that I haven't mentioned as well that I look at who I think are amazing. And we should read about what these people did, okay? Because they essentially were doing all of this scientific research and gaining this knowledge from nothing. No one had really come before the 1920s, for example. So these people are also very intelligent and shouldn't be forgotten, because these people that I keep mentioning are being forgotten, written out of history.
Continuum, not as a cutoff. But you just don't have time to do that if you're interpreting blood work or those sorts of things, if you're like seeing a lot of patients and stuff like that. So you have to have, at some point they have to go from pre-diabetic, like fine, to pre-type 2 diabetic to type 2 diabetic, or
this is very important, okay? So listen to this.
Insulin resistance, and we use blood sugar, fasting blood sugar as that cutoff. But if somebody's at, if over 100 or over 105 is pre-diabetic and under 105, 104 is not the same as 80. Does this make sense? You're not perfectly fine at 104, and then you get to 105 and you have full-blown pre-diabetes. Like, it doesn't work like that. But we have to define it at some point so we can treat it and have a conversation about it, improve drugs over it, and do all these different things to meet these criteria.
There you go. Did you hear that?
Right, work like that. But we have to define it at some point so we can treat it and have a conversation about it, improve drugs over it, and do all these different things to meet these criteria.
So did you hear, okay, did you hear diet? Or did you hear drugs? Did you hear the word drugs? Okay, play it one more time.
Work like that. But we have to define it at some point so we can treat it and have a conversation about it, improve drugs over it, and do all these different things to meet these criteria in order to...
There we go. There's the answer. There's the answer to this whole video right there. Drugs. How we can deal with it with drugs. Okay. So if you're saying you've been thinking this whole time that I'm talking a load of nonsense, and that everyone's here in the pharmaceutical industry is here to make people healthy, okay? There it is. There's the answer. Did he mention reversing the diet that's causing such ill health? No, it was drugs. Okay? So, when he's talking about the number, so I think he says 105 or 106.
Does this make sense? You're not perfectly fine at 104, and then you get to 105 and you have full-blown pre-diabetes. Like, it doesn't work like that. But we have to define it at some point so we can treat it and have a conversation about it, improve drugs over it, and do all these different...
We have to define it so that we can give drugs, okay? So the definition of how much glucose has been in the blood for someone to be said, well, they're pre-diabetic, or then they're diabetic. So their fasting levels of glucose in the blood has been coming down. So what I mean is, in the past, when we were first categorizing type 2 diabetes and how high your fasting levels of glucose would have to be, it was in the range of about 200 or so, maybe in the 60s or so. And now today it's almost 100 or 120. And why is that? Well, because if you're saying someone has to have a fasting level of 120, and I won't use the units like he said to keep it simple, then that means there's more people who are in the range, and therefore they can be told to have drugs. It's as simple as that. So if your fasting level is 200, and then we've got loads of people who are like within 100 or so, 120, then you bring it down, and more people are then being prescribed drugs. Okay. And he didn't say diet. This is the whole answer to my point right here, right now, in this video. It's probably taken me like 3 hours to get to this point, but this is the most important point in the video. Okay.
Does this make sense? You're not perfectly fine at 104, and then you get to 105 and you have full-blown pre-diabetes. Like, it doesn't work like that. But we have to define it at some point so we can treat it and have a conversation about it, improve drugs over it, and do all these different things to meet these...
Approve drugs over it. Oh my god. Yeah. And he's just saying it so just he's so happy to say it, seemingly enough. And not like, well, actually, if you change your diet, rice, fruit, sugar, to rice, fruit, and sugar, plant-based, vegan, low-fat, no oil diet, and you cut out all of the donuts, the high-fatty meals, and the animal products. And that's also another point when he was talking about all the foods that you eat. He didn't say, oh, a bowl of rice, a spike, or then a chicken, whatever, or some eggs or bacon or whatever. There's spikes. So these foods, the chicken and the eggs and the bacon, these lead to higher levels of insulin. They stay up. It's a higher insulin response than to with sugar and to with rice. And just, look up the Sweeney paper, okay, from 1927, or the Hemsworth paper. There's one from 1940 where he puts everything in there.
Criteria in order to kind of capture the super complex, like physiological dysregulation.
And Kempner. I mean, it's just crazy.
Metabolic dysregulation. Okay, we good?
Yeah. This is all making sense. Yeah, it's good context.
No, we're not good. Okay? We're not good. We're the opposite of good. We're going the wrong way.
I have to be able to understand this.
I feel like, I've been watching this video for so long, I just feel like my energy, my life force is being drained from out of me.
A1C value of 5.
Yeah, I think you have to have it. I think you have to have it because
You have to.
when A1C. So really, what happened is that I'll just say one more quick background thing. The gold standard for measuring insulin resistance is to measure when you infuse insulin to the system. So this is called hyperinsulinemic. One of the things that happen
And just replay that.
in insulin resistance is to measure when you is that I'll just say one more quick background thing. The gold standard for measuring insulin resistance is to
Okay, the gold standard for measuring insulin resistance, which he's about to explain, so just play it one more time.
So really, what happened is that I'll just say one more quick background thing. The gold standard for measuring insulin resistance is to measure when you infuse insulin to the system. So this is called
So the gold standard is the oral glucose tolerance test, okay? The gold standard for simply finding out about someone's diabetes and their insulin resistance. You get them to fast, then give them some sugar water. You test, so you get them to fast, you test their blood, then you get them to drink some sugar water. You then retest their blood periodically afterwards. And then you get them to eat a different meal. So a high carb meal, high carbohydrate meal, or a high fat meal. And guess what happens? So there's a good quote, I think it's from Nathan Pritzker, who's another one who I look to. One of these giants of information and intelligence. Something along the lines of, most Americans would fail the oral glucose tolerance test after their meal, their tea. So most people in America would be diabetic if they took an oral glucose tolerance test after their standard American diet lunch, or after their dinner. They'd all be diabetic because of all the fat. They would fail. So essentially, the tolerance test is that if the glucose that you've taken in a test, your blood sugar remains high, you're resistant, and if the glucose levels come down, you're not resistant. That is the gold standard. So I don't know what he's talking about. Maybe I could be wrong. And maybe this is another way that I don't know. At this point in the video, I don't know anymore, to be honest.
insulinemic.
I don't know what he's talking about. He said this is the gold standard, and I don't think he says the actual name of it.
One of the things that happens when you are insulin sensitive is that insulin increases the uptake of blood sugar from the blood into the muscle. It also suppresses the production of glucose by the liver, right? Because since you have this exogenous source of carbohydrates, you don't need to be pumping it out. We want to be saving it for when you have a fasting, and you need to pump that glucose out and raise increase gluconeogenesis. So the gold standard for this is called the hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamp.
What?
what you do is you hook a person up, you infuse insulin at a hyperphysiologic level,
Yeah,
and that stays
I'm
the
just
same.
going to skip this because
And when you use that,
I don't want to waste your
there's
time.
and this is what Chris Melville called, this is the flux story. So there's like you take a blood draw, you get a value. That doesn't tell you anything about the
Oral glucose tolerance test. Okay. Oral glucose tolerance test. Someone might try and go, ooh, smoke and mirrors. Okay. For the last time, oral glucose tolerance test. Okay.
of the whole system. How fast is the wheel turning over? Right? And for cyclists, the classic example of this is intracellular fat, or what's called intramuscular triglyceride. Obese individuals and elite cyclists have similar levels of fat stored in their muscles. One, in the case of an obese individual, there's a lot of complications, dysregulation, insulin resistance that is tied to that high fat level. The other one, no metabolic issues. And this
Woo, 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 woo. I hope you woke up from the coma that you've just been in. He's just said it. So, are you joking me? I mean, it goes from one extreme to the other, it's like an emotional roller coaster. So I'll just play that again. He just said fat and obese, unhealthy, and then fat and obese, unhealthy. So I'll just replay that again. And fat causes obesity. Fat causes obesity. Fat causes diabetes.
of this is intracellular fat, or what's called intramuscular triglyceride. Obese individuals and elite cyclists have similar levels of fat stored in their muscles. One, in the case of an obese individual, there's a lot of complications, dysregulation, insulin resistance.
What?
That is tied to that high fat level. The other one, no metabolic issues. And this becomes
Say that again.
a lot of complications.
So he's just confirmed everything that
Elite cyclists have similar levels of fat stored in their muscles. One, in the case of an obese individual, there's a lot of complications, dysregulation, insulin resistance.
Insulin resistance from being obese. So, from being fat, caused by eating fat, not by eating sugar and carbohydrates, as we've just spent the last, 3 years talking about, it feels like at this point. So, I have to say, was this video a whole prank, or, or a bet? How ridiculous can I get my talk? How can I confuse Jonathan? Never to ask me any questions about what on earth I'm talking about. I would say, you need to, if Jonathan knew this question was coming up, Jonathan, and just like the audience who are watching, educate yourself. Okay? You need to educate yourself. So if you get a diagnosis, maybe of cancer tomorrow or this afternoon or whenever, and someone comes to you and they say, well, this is your life right now, you need to educate yourself. Okay? Because these are important things. Okay? It's not like going to the shops, buying a new TV or a car or a new bike. Bike's very important, a new bicycle. But yeah, just going and buying a new toaster. Or this is about, you're going to live or you're going to die. You're going to be unhealthy or you're not. So you need to make sure that the information that you're hearing isn't going to be detrimental to your health. And yes, some of the information that I talk about can be a bit difficult to find because, for example, the Kempner papers, if you go and look them up on PubMed, a lot of them don't even have, when you look them up, they don't have an introduction or an abstract. So on a scientific paper, when you go and look it up, it should just have a little piece of writing that just explains to you what the paper was about and the maybe the methodology, or just explaining what the paper is and maybe the conclusions or the findings, or just something, like an abstract. And quite often on the Kempner papers, if not some or all of them, don't even have this. They're not even published with that. So they're just blank. Okay? Because the world revolves around money, sadly and horrifically enough.
That is tied to that high fat level. The other one, no metabolic issues. And
high fat level, high fat level, high fat level, high fat level. Okay. He said it himself. He's just said it himself.
It becomes a story now of flux because there's turnover of that. And it's not sitting there to turn into ceramide and cause inflammation and cause an immune response and do these different types of things.
Yeah. The fat, yeah, causes fat from fat, not from carbohydrate.
The system is built to be more efficient by having that there. In the case of cyclists, over here, we're running out of places to store fat, and we never burn fat because we always have lots of insulin and sugar.
Give me strength, please. Give me strength. So play that again.
Be more efficient by having that there. In the case of cyclists, over here, we're running out of places to store fat.
You don't need to be a cyclist to be lean. If you eat a high-fat diet, it doesn't matter if you're a cyclist. You will be fat as a cyclist if you eat fat. And if you eat a high-carbohydrate diet, you'll be lean as a cyclist. Even if you're not a cyclist, you'll be lean, okay? So cyclist and fat, fat. Not a cyclist and fat, fat. Cyclist and high-carb, lean. Not a cyclist, lean, but not as lean as the cyclist, okay? So you'll be lean. So this is a fat person and a fat cyclist, they're the same. And then someone who is maybe they eat carbohydrate, they are this lean. And then if you're a cyclist, you become this lean, okay? This is why people make the joke, you go, oh, I'm lean, okay? So fat, lean as a cyclist. So this is a fat cyclist on fat, lean cyclist on carbs. Fat person not cycling, fat. And then a person who's eating carbs, they're lean. They're still lean, but they're not as lean as a cyclist. Okay. Most cyclists I see and talk to, most of them are fat. They're not even lean on the heavier side of lean. They're mostly fat. Even people who want to do races, if they're a racer and they're doing like time trials or whatever, and they want to improve their watts per kilo, they go, well, I have my chicken and my rice. Yeah. And the chicken's making you fat. Okay. And they say, well, I have a little bit of rice, a lot of chicken, and I'm not getting lean. So cut the chicken out and increase the rice.
We never burn fat because we always have lots of insulin and sugar in the system. And so
okay,
we're running out of places to store fat, and we never burn fat because...
Yeah, so you have essentially a fixed number of fat cells. And then as I've explained, with insulin resistance, the whole point is you put some store of fat on your body naturally, and then the fat cells, essentially, you've got a fixed number and they can expand it and take in more fat. And then, yeah, there's essentially a fixed point. And then there are other systems, like fat can overspill out of the fat cells and it gets deposited elsewhere on the body.
We always have lots of insulin.
And that's when it gets deposited, like around your heart or around your pancreas, okay? And then that can start destroying your pancreas.
In the system. And so there's no flux, and now you end up getting fat accumulation in tissues that you don't want with no flux, and that comes with a bunch of issues. So the reason why this whole...
Okay, you're always burning fat alongside carbohydrate, but the primary energy system is glycolysis. Okay, and then so you need to understand fat burns in the fires of carbohydrates. Okay, so if you want to burn more fat, you need to eat more rice, fruit and sugar. Okay, and fat is broken down, and the way you actually lose fat off your body is you breathe it out. Okay, it's CO2. So the main waste product from fat metabolized being burnt in your body is CO2 and water. So CO2, you breathe it out. So if you consume more sugar, you go faster, you breathe more, you burn more fat. And then the other one is with the water, you sweat it out or you pee it out. Okay.
context is important is because when A1C came along, it was really a game changer for diagnostics because that comes with a bunch of issues. So the reason why this whole there's no flux, and now you end up getting fat accumulation in tissues that you don't want with no flux, and that comes with a bunch of issues. So
just a load of family friendly channel, so it's a load of blah, blah, blah.
You know why this whole context?
A load of words. It's just a load of. I see it so many times on social media. All of these words and jargon to make it sound like it's really interesting and clever and intelligent. Whereas if you just people don't want to hear. The answer is simple. It's plant-based, low fat, low protein, high carbohydrate, rice, fruit, and sugar, and you'll live a healthy life for as long as however many years you get. People don't want to hear that. They want to hear all of this jargon and funny words and flux and blah blah blah. Okay, fat causes insulin resistance. Okay, so if you want to be more sensitive to insulin, sugar is your friend. Okay.
Is important is because when A1C came along, it was really a game changer for diagnostics because what A1C.
Whew. So again, A1C, hemoglobin A1C, HbA1c. This is a game changer for the pharmaceutical industry. Okay, so we can get people more and more worried. And if there's another way that we can get people to take diabetic drugs, then yeah, A1C is another way for the pharmaceutical industry to get you on the drugs. Like Kyle said, how can we treat it? Drugs. He didn't mention diet. It's funny that, isn't it? This whole thing's about diet, and he doesn't mention, well, how do I reverse it? Well, actually he does. He says we're over-consuming sugar. So there you go. Getting people to reduce their sugar intake causes people to become diabetic because they fear sugar. They have sugar phobia, like you would have a phobia for heights, vertigo, or whatever you want to call it. You have a fear for sugar. You cut sugar. Therefore, you have to get your source of energy from other sources. So the other sources are fat and protein, and then you become diabetic because you're on a high fat, high animal protein diet. And yeah, the answer's there, isn't it? It's not conspiracy. It's the horror. Okay. Like from that film Apocalypse Now, where Marlon Brando's character says at the end of the film, when is it Martin Sheen, I think his character, cuts him down like the sacrificial bull that's happening in the background. And as he's dying, he says, the horror, the horror, the horror. Okay. So this is reality, isn't it? Apocalypse now. Okay, we're in the apocalypse now. Everyone's getting fat, everyone's getting sick, and it's making them stupid, and it's making them, therefore, because you're stupid, you can be told, and you don't think, and you just say, yeah, give me more drugs. More drugs equals better life. I don't know.
Is a glycosylation reaction. So basically what that means is that the sugars in your bloodstream.
So I'm going to skip it ahead again because, it's just, I think he's wasting your time, basically.
Jump in. If you're measuring A1C, A1C, it's a type of hemoglobin, and it kind of...
It just annoys me, Jonathan. You didn't ever ask him about anything that he was saying or challenge him.
serves as a map of what's happened over the last month or so, of what's gone on in terms of how much sugar it's been interacting with.
Yes.
And when you measure that A1C over time, that's why, and like for context, if your A1C is below 5.7, they consider that in the normal or healthy range, at least this is according to my understanding. And then if you're 5.7 to 6.4, it's considered pre-diabetic. And then if you're 6.5 or above, it's considered diabetic. You are likely needing medical care of some kind or another to manage that.
Okay, just to explain again the horrors of the world, as I've just said, the A1C values are not based on any meaningful scientific evidence, okay? So just let that sink in. It's just getting you, pushing you to take expensive medications. It's not based on any meaningful scientific evidence. Okay, so question your doctor and stop being fooled and being told and just saying yes, okay, because you're the doctor and therefore, you know, they get a new drug, the pharmaceutical industry gives them a little description of what the drug is, how you should administer it, what are the levels, and they give it. So it comes in a little pack and it'll tell them what to do, and they'll go, oh right, I need to give this, and that's all they're doing. It's just following a little instruction manual.
But in the end, what you're pointing out is really important to understand, that this is a proxy to help understand.
Again, I'll just fast forward it because I don't want to waste any more time with the nonsense.
So you basically put governors on everything. So you have a rise in cortisol, which reduces the amount of sugar because again, your brain.
Ooh. What the hell? Cortisol increases sugar in the blood, okay? So cortisol is your... Let's play that again.
Fuel on board. We're trying to go through it at this rate, and that's not going to add up. And so you basically put governors on everything. So you have a rise in cortisol, which reduces the amount of sugar
Cortisol is your stress hormone, okay? So in the wild, cortisol naturally would be released in short periods of time in order to keep you alive. So if you needed to run from a predator, yes, human beings used to have predators, okay, until we started killing each other instead of the animals. So the predator of human beings is other human beings, okay? We're not part of the natural world or this world anymore. We're not an animal anymore. We're something different in a completely unrelated, you know, if you're religious or whatever, you'd say, well, is this what we were intended to be? Because we're not part of the world that, you know, God created anymore, are we? Where was the pharmaceutical industry when Adam and Eve were eating fruits in the Garden of Eden? Okay, there was no little pharmacy in the corner, was there, next to the tigers and the antelope? Okay, so you'd get stressed, stay alive. There's a tiger chasing me or a lion chasing me, whatever. Cortisol release, that causes sugar to be released, and therefore you have energy to run away and live. If you constantly have chronic levels of cortisol, you will damage your body, okay? Such as stress from the modern world, the diet that's causing you to be unhealthy, bad sleep from coffee addiction because you're not allowed sugar, so you swap sugar, which is the thing that your body needs in order to thrive, for drug dependencies like caffeine, which destroys your health. Okay, so everything is trying to get you to cut out sugar, not be vegan, plant-based, and to be a drug addict. Okay, you know, this is like this video is like an advert. You know, an advert for, you know, you could interpret it as like adverts for drugs or misinformation to get people confused. And yeah, like I said, it's insidious. This slow creeping of just, yeah. They're all laughing and smiling, and it's very, yeah, it's not funny.
Shout out to my folks on the community health side of things, because it shows you how effective communication efforts to raise awareness about the potential harmful effects of sugar, especially processed sugar, and the overconsumption of it is. That for at a society level. And cyclists.
So, you know, I want to swear, I want to make gesticulations, and, you know, I say watching this video is sort of draining the life force and energy from my being, but I suppose you might be able to tell, yeah, if you watch other videos on the channel, this one's quite different to the others because I'm very angry. Because this is nonsense, okay? Excess dietary fat and protein is killing millions and millions of people around the world because of this message of sugar is bad. Okay. So heart disease, the leading cause of death in the West, and overall cancer just pips it. Most people dying of cancers. And they're related again to animal protein. So, for example, the animal protein in milk, so dairy milk, linked to cancers. Animal protein, animal products linked to cancers. Even cancers that you wouldn't even think, like breast cancer. And then heart disease from fatty foods, from animal agriculture, funding, the food industry funding the message that you should eat animal products. The more you eat, the healthier you get. And if that doesn't work and you're getting heart disease, well, guess what? The pharmaceutical industry, our best mates, have got a pill for you. So if you want to be fat, sick, and stupid and drug dependent, then carry on listening to the message of sugar is bad. And if you want to get heart disease and cancer and type 1 and type 2 diabetes, then yeah, carry on and don't change your lifestyle.
Our world revolves around bikes, but like it's a small knit group in the 7 billion people that live in this or whatever, and a different.
There are billions of people that live on white rice and sweet potato and potatoes and these high carbohydrate diets. And they're leaner than these two. I want to call them really nice words. They're leaner than these two. And they're not cyclists or they're skiers or whatever they were laughing about at the beginning. And they're lean. And we've seen historically the change where people are becoming diabetic and suffering all these chronic diseases. And their sugar consumption is going down. Carbohydrate consumption is going down. Okay, so fat consumption is going up. Protein consumption is going. Animal protein consumption is going up. Sugar level consumption is going down. Diabetes is going up. And guess what? If you want to make a load of money right now, I would, and if you do, and you don't care about health and the world and ethics and anything, then invest in diabetes stocks. Okay, so if you want to make quick money, good money, invest in drugs for treating type 2 diabetes because you'll make mint money. Okay, but if you want to not make any money, like I apparently don't, I don't sell supplements, I'm not selling animal products, I'll help people. And if you want to have a food plan that doesn't kill you, I just help people make a food plan based on rice, fruit, and sugar, essentially, is the staples. There's other nuances to it, but this is the basis. Okay.
Yeah, but they're very different. Exactly. The 300 million people that live in the U.S. Okay, let's just limit that to our. And so,
300 million people in the US. Nice. Big market to make money out of people. Okay. To make them sick and make money out of them. You don't need to be a cyclist to not be diabetic. I'll just skip it here. We're getting to the end now.
and jump in real quick on this because when I do
I'm gonna have to sleep for about 3 weeks after this.
give talks to populations like we're doing right now, and even when I sit down with the athletes, we really do talk about sort of being conscious of how many times am I spiking insulin throughout the day by consuming carbohydrates at rest. And it's a good way to now think about like, well, I'm hungry. A cheese stick has no sugar, a little bit of fat, it's a protein. I can get a little bit of protein, I get a little bit of satisfaction, I can get a little bit of calories. It's not unhealthy, but it's also not going to spike blood glucose. And this is one of the things when I talk to like local youth groups and things like that.
Okay, this is like, directly to Kyle. To put it as nicely as I can, you need to pull your finger out. Just play that again.
A cheese stick has no sugar, a little bit of fat, it's a protein. I can get a little bit of protein, I get a little bit of satisfaction, I can get a little bit of calories. It's not unhealthy.
What is the leading cause of chronic disease in the West? Okay, Kyle. It's heart disease. And what is this caused by? Fat. So I don't know whether I need to infer any more about how terrible it is what you just said.
Good way to now think about like, well, I'm hungry. A cheese stick has no sugar, a little bit of fat, it's a protein. I can get a little bit of protein, I get a little bit of satisfaction, I can get a little bit of calories. It's not unhealthy.
Okay. I hope that, other scientists, other people, they see this and they pull you up you know, grab you by the collar, sort of, so to speak. You know, I can't be the only one who's watched this video and has been appalled by the garbage that has been said in this video. I mean, it's shocking, and it's just more of the same. You know, if you're enlightened, you know the information, and you're not just listening to sound bites and the marketing, and you've actually educated yourself. It's horrific. And just look. Okay, so yes, you'll go, well, sugar causes everything. It causes cancer and diabetes, and well, I've just gone through and explained everything that we know based on all of this study. You know, the Walter Kempner. You can't argue against Walter Kempner, okay? What he did. So don't go to the internet and look and just say, well, internet says it's bad. What does that even mean? It's bad. It's absolutely ridiculous. You know, I'm so angry from the video.
But it's also not going to spike blood glucose. And you know, this is one of the things when I talk to like local.
So there you go. There you go. It's not going to spike blood glucose. That's all. That's the only thing that's important. You know, you're dying of cancer and heart disease, and you've got diabetes, but thankfully, you didn't get a spike. Whoa!
Youth groups and things like that, and their parents. We talk about how like it's important to pair dessert with dinner.
I think I'm going to stop the video here because, you know, he's talking to children and their parents. So I think, you know, I could say a lot of things that would, you know, get me into trouble for trying to say the truth, for saying the truth, you know. So no, I don't think children should be told this. You know, I don't think children, okay. If you are parents and you're watching this, okay, educate yourself, and therefore you won't kill your children, kill yourself and kill your children from the standard American diet, which is making people sick. So I think I'm not going to do any more, otherwise, you know, my channel's just going to disappear. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and check out all my other videos on the channel. So yeah, I'm gonna stop it there because I think it's getting into dangerous territory here now when he's talking about children. Because, you know, I could start accusing, and you know, we'd go from science to accusation. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any comments, I know this video is going to be about 2.5 hours long, I think. Nice podcast length, so you can go back and watch it over and over again. I put a bunch of links. You know, like and subscribe, and you know, thank you for your time. These videos take longer to make, so obviously won't be videos like this all the time, but this is the first and this is the last video that I'm ever going to watch of TrainerRoad. And if TrainerRoad don't pull their finger out like Kyle needs to, and they actually give scientific information, then I don't recommend anyone watching TrainerRoad. Okay, I recommend they unsubscribe from TrainerRoad. They subscribe to Life, Bikes, Bananas and Spice, and that way they can enjoy life more. Okay, improve your life quality based on a meal plan and not based on me selling you supplements and whatever else to make you diabetic. So thank you for your time, and yeah, try not to get emotional and too angry in this video. But anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Ciao. Like and subscribe. Gonna go and sleep now, probably. Gonna go and collapse. I'm gonna go and have a bunch of sugar because my cortisol levels are